Alrighty. Well, welcome everybody. As I mentioned, my name is Carlos Gutierrez. I'm the director of the Veterans Business Outreach Center here at University of Texas Pan American. With us and also going to be participating in the class and giving some of the presentations is Bill Lickman. He's our business advisor. He's in the back here. Y'all will meet him in a minute. And y'all all know Victoria. She'll probably be helping out as we move through things. Just to give kind of an overview of the way it's going to go. First of all, I'm going to give you a little overview of our program here at Pan Am. Then I'm going to tell you about this particular project, which is funded by the Texas Veterans Commission, this training project for these 6 sessions that you're going to be doing. And then we'll talk about some additional resources that are available for you as we move forward. And then we're going to get into the actual training. The actual training is 6 sessions, and I'm going to talk a little bit more how that's separated into particular categories and things like that later. So a little bit about our program. This is our 14th year here at University of Texas Pan American. We've been here since '99. We were created by the Small Business Act, Section 8B. Basically, we're in our 3rd, 5th year award, so we've been doing this for a little while, year 14 now. And this is, for those of you that are here on location, we do have some folks here that are on location. Y'all already know we're here at 1407 Freddie Gonzalez Drive. We're in Edinburgh, Texas, South Texas. This is being recorded for a webinar, obviously, so pretty soon it'll be sent out to veterans all over the state of Texas. What our mission is to help create, retain, and develop businesses. It's pretty simple. We help veterans that fall into all of these categories: veterans, service disabled, reservists, guard members, active duty, also spouses of veterans and widowed spouses. These are some of the other VBOC centers throughout the country. We got a network of 15 other Veterans Business Outreach Centers. So if you ever move or you're ever moving to a different area where one of these is at, feel free to reach out to these folks as well. This is just a map that shows where a lot of these centers are. A lot of them are collaborative initiatives that are undertaken as part of a nonprofit, grant-funded, and university collaborative partnerships. So some of them are partnered with universities and the others are with nonprofits. The majority are actually with universities. The blue stars represent actual SBA offices. And there's also a big network of what's called SBDCs throughout the country as well. That stands for Small Business Development Centers. We're actually co-located with one here. Our offices are right behind us and the SBDC is right next to us. And they do similar work as the Veterans Business Outreach Center. We'll talk a little bit about them as well. So eligibility for the Veterans Business Outreach Program in general is that you have to be a veteran. Basically, if you have a DD-214, you served your time, you qualify as long as you were not dishonorably discharged. So you can fall into one of those other categories. Honorable under general or medically discharged, or obviously honorable, but you just can't be dishonorably discharged. We also do some work with veterans that are reservists, maybe they were activated, National Guard members, and obviously active duty veterans, active duty military as well. So what's the main thing that we actually do, you might be asking yourself. The main thing we do is one-on-one counseling, technical assistance, partner with you one-on-one. So this training is just an introduction to entrepreneurship, and later on we're going to be there to set up appointments with you and refer you to other resources that are available to you in your local community and work with you one-on-one directly to develop your business plan and your financial projections, acquire some research, look at market segmentation, do a gap analysis, develop strategy, all those type of things in general. If we can't help you, we usually have those partners that I mentioned earlier. We have SBDCs, we have procurement and technical assistance centers, other nonprofit agencies, veteran nonprofits, and micro lenders, non-bank lenders throughout the state that do very, very great programs in general, and also a lot of them have programs for the veteran community as well. Now, the one-on-one counseling consists of you coming in doing office visits. We also do community outreach, telephone, email consultation. I'll tell you that obviously for the group of us that's here, most of the collaboration and interaction that we do will involve you coming into the office, and we'll sit down and we'll look at your documentation, your paperwork. We'll figure out where you need to go. We'll tell you what next steps should happen in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll set up an appointment for a couple of weeks after that. Unless you're on a shorter time horizon, you need to move quick, then we'll start doing those meetings maybe every week. until we get you where you need to be. For those folks that are out of town, most of that interaction is going to involve, us doing meetings with you via teleconference, over the phone, and a lot of times when we're out doing outreach and events and conferences and other trainings, we'll add on some events where we can partner with those out-of-town folks and do the one-on-ones with them as well. So the research that we're able to provide offers insight on industry trends, statistics, sources of capital, things like that. Mainly the research that we provides industry baseline data. We use a couple of different ones. We've switched over the years from one service to another. Most recently it was First Research, and right now we're able to utilize IBIS World, and these are all Hoover's and Dun & Bradstreet. These type of research agencies aggregate data on industries, and then they sell it. They usually sell it for a hefty price. It's usually a couple of $1,000 for a subscription, or you can buy one report from $75 to a couple of $100. Problem is, you sometimes you might not even know that that's the right industry or the right report that you need, and that can end up costing you a couple $100. That's the benefit of utilizing these type of services. If nothing else, we're going to be able to look at what industry you're going into and pull you some reports. It's a hit or miss sometimes in the early stages because of the different segments within each industry. I pulled some last week for a client, and it was totally wrong. It was just we had the wrong NAICS number. It wasn't the right research, and then you have to reorder it. And hopefully, as you move through these different categories of research agencies, sooner or later you get to the ones that have the best information. Those just serve as a foundation, though. Keep in mind, it's not a end-all, be-all of research. When you get this secondhand, it's called secondary research. That's just a place to start, a place to get get your bearings as you're looking at what's going on in this industry. Is it a mature industry? What are the trends looking like? Later on, you're going to have to do some actual primary research and find out what's going on in my local community within that industry, and you're going to have particular agencies that you can contact that will help you with that as well. The other thing that we work with clients a lot on is the business plan. The business plan is a document that gives information about the company, the who, what, why, where, and when. Mainly also, how much capital do you need, how much profit are you going to make, and when are you going to be able to pay back whoever you're going to borrow money from. For an investor, typically a lender, that's one of the main things they're concerned with. You'll see that in any interactions with lenders, commercial lenders, bankers, they're going to look at your first page, and then they're going to look at your financials. They expect you to have written all the rest of that, because it's kind of like when we were in school, they're going to tell you, I'm not going to read all your work. I just want you to do the work because I want to make sure you did your homework. And that's kind of what a business plan is for. It serves the purpose of internal understanding and external justification. By external justification, I mean it serves as a thing that you can present to somebody and say, this is my plan, this is the research that I've done, and this is the input I've received from other industry experts about why my strategy for executing this plan is going to make me money. These are other training classes that we give, projection generation, market validation. You're obviously in one of them. This is the end-to-end kind of boot camp approach program. And these are some other services that we can partner with some research partners to help you out with these. I mean, obviously the educational services and benefits, we don't do that directly. We deal specifically with business creation, business development, but we'll put you in contact with somebody if you have any questions about anything like who do I contact about buying a house or things like that. There's the Veterans Land Board and all those agencies. We have contacts within those communities. For those veterans that are just getting out of the military, there's a great program that the DOD and SBA just started in a collaboration with some other agencies to provide training, just like this training, to veterans such as yourselves. It's just for folks that are transitioning right now, though. It's called Boots to Business program. It includes a 2-day add-on to the transition, when the mandatory 5-day transition, and it also includes an 8-week program afterwards, whereby they can get this kind of training that we're going to get into today. We talk about some of the specifics, compliance issues, sales, pricing, all those type of things. But for the majority of us, myself included, they haven't reached the point where they're including the full base of all veterans. There's other era veterans that are not included in this. That's one of the things that I know they're working on right now. They had to start somewhere, so they started with the transitioning veterans, and that's one of the reasons why this program that we're working on is so valuable. We're providing this service to all veterans of all eras, anytime you serve, and all type of veterans. Later on, I think this one's going to evolve a little bit more, and it's going to include everybody. But they have to start somewhere. These are also similar programs. The one at the bottom is for veterans transitioning, National Guard and reservists primarily. This Veterans Women's one is for all veterans of all eras that are women, female veterans. These other two are for veterans with disabilities and their families. So the focus of those first two is just veterans with disabilities, and it's really primarily focused on just this current era, OIF, OEF. But I have heard that some veterans from previous eras, First Gulf War and Vietnam, have been accepted to that program. So for those two, I would say go ahead and try to apply, and you might be accepted to those programs. Whereas the Yellow Ribbon Integration, it's a transition type program. If you're not getting out right now, it really wouldn't apply to you. Now, for all of these programs, I've listed here the website, and if you want additional information on it, feel free to contact me. My contact information is on our website, and those of you that are here have my card. So if you just have a question about, well, maybe can I get into this one? Can you help me with the application? Can you point me in the right direction? What should I do before I get there? For any of these programs, they're great programs. These first two offer like a 10-day boot camp type of thing where they fly you out to wherever it is. The one in Texas is at Texas A&M University. It's collaborative with their university professors, and they pay for the expenses while you're there. Then they do a year-long mentorship program where they're giving you kind of homework and modules and things that you're doing. And then at the end, you would come back in for a 3-day conference symposium when they bring you back in and do a little wrap-up and everything for you. And these are valuable programs. What I do recommend to anybody that wants to apply for those is this is a great starter because you want to have kind of a foundation of business knowledge before you get into that kind of situation. And you want to have, if you have a business idea already and it's not fleshed out, it's best to flesh it out as much as you can before you get there. Because once you get there, you're going to be in an environment that's really rich with people that can actually help you probably take it to the next step. And if you're 6 months from moving forward, I would think that you're setting yourself up to not get as much out of it as you possibly could. This is our contact information. Give me 1 sec. Now I'm just going to move through. So we're done with that's a basic overview of our program here at the University of Texas Pan American. Now within this program, we just started a grant-funded program that's funded by Texas Veterans Commission, which is the one you guys are here for, and our folks in the watching the webinar are here for it, and that's called the ETP program, Entrepreneurship Training Program. And basically, these are the things that we're going to cover. We have 6 sessions. The first 2, we're going to do core modules. The next 3 are subject matter specific. We're going to do management and operation, sales and marketing, and reaching the market, finance and funding. So we're going to cover all these subject matters. I like to call it a hybrid of a end-to-end comprehensive because it's not we're not going to do what's called a deep dive into all these subject matters. That would take as long as it would take somebody to do an undergraduate business degree and an MBA. We're not going to get into all that, but you're going to know all of the things that you should be addressing as you move through your planning to start your business. If there's something you look at later on down the line and you're looking at some of the course material that we covered and you say, hey, I didn't really get into that, we didn't touch that subject matter, then you'll realize, hey, I need to go find out about this. What do I need to know about compliances and licensing and permits? Let me see who I can contact for that. And we have actual websites and contacts that you can actually contact these people directly to find out what you need. As I mentioned, it's 24 hours completely. At the end of the training, we're going to expect, and we'll talk about this in the 4th and 5th session, we're going to expect that you give a presentation on your business idea. For those of you that are in the class here, for those of you that are doing the webinar, I'm going to send you the presentation, and then you can send me back your presentation that you've developed, your PowerPoint. But for everybody else, y'all are going to get the joy and excitement of actually getting up here and presenting it. Now, like I said, some of you might be at just the early planning stage, and you might not have any idea what you're doing. You might just try to be getting ahead of the curve. And that's fine. If you feel like your idea isn't developed and fleshed out enough to give the presentation, nobody's going to be forced to give a presentation against your will, make you stand there and give your presentation. But if you are and you're ready for it, then we're going to do some of that with the class members that we have here, and we're going to be able to get a little bit of analysis and critique from myself and Bill, the other advisors, and some of our partners that might be involved as well with SBDC, and we're going to have somebody from SBA come in. Also, it serves to have the input just from other people that are sitting in the class. And, you know, I always advise people, if you have an issue, if you think that there's a problem with that guy's business plan, that's why we're in the class. You ought to ask the questions. And he might not know the answer, and you just asking the question might make you think of something that's going to move down a particular path with your own idea. So that's really just an idea generation exercise, and it's going to be really a great exercise. At the end of that, after you do all 6 sessions, then we give you a nice certificate of completion that says, I've done this entrepreneurship training, and you can hang it on your wall or do whatever you want with it. It is actually a really nice certificate. We just finished a training with the Wounded Warrior Project in San Antonio, and we printed them up for those guys, and I got a lot of real good feedback from them about it. So also at the end of the training, you might require some very specific training in a particular subject matter. One of the ones I see a lot is, how do I come up with my financial projections, or how do I do pricing? If that's the case, then we're going to for each particular client, we're going to advise that you take an additional training. We might say, hey, Aurelio, you need to take this class on pricing. And we know EGBI in Austin has a great presentation on pricing, and they're really innovative and forward thinking as well. I do want to mention them real quick. I'm going to talk more about them later. But we've done another one of these cohorts with the Economic Growth and Business Incubator in Austin, and they're really a forward thinking nonprofit, and they have these same type of things that they're setting up right now. So if you contact them and you say, I want some pricing things, they'll say, hey, we're going to do a webinar just on pricing. It'll be a 30-minute to an hour type of thing. Usually with webinars, that's why we're going to give breaks every 45 minutes. Nobody can sit through 4 hours of this stuff. I can't talk to you guys for 4 hours. It's too much. So we're going to cut this up into little chunks that are edible, and we'll move forward. So as we move forward with each of you individually as clients, we're going to find out what stage you're at, what you really need. I mean, some of you might be here and say, what I really want to get into is government contracting. Well, then that's a different trajectory you're going to be down, and we got guys we can partner you up with that. But we'll be determining that later on as we move through. Eligibility for the program is you must be a veteran. You must show proof of status. For everybody that's attending the program right now, we should have received that from you already. If not, we'll be getting it from you soon. Victoria will probably be contacting you. For anybody that's watching this that might be interested in it, we're going to have another one in October. It's going to start around the second week of October. It's going to be the same setup. We're going to do a webinar. We're going to have an on-site, and Victoria will be sending out information to any of those veterans that are interested about when it's going to start and times and things like that. This is our contact information once again. Those are the 2 overviews of the program. Does anybody have any questions so far? Nothing yet? All right. Give me a second. One second. All right.
That's the only question. Are you going to
Yes,
have
sir.
slides available?
Yes, these slides will be sent to everybody that is signed up. And if you came in late or we don't have your email information, make sure you send it to us, or make sure you sign in the back on the sign-in sheet. Yes, sir.
I think it's important for people to understand the research that we help you out with. Carlos mentioned that a lot of these firms charge quite a bit of money for it. If you go through us, we'll do it pretty much for free.
Right.
It doesn't cost you.
For free. For free. Doesn't cost you anything. Thank you for pointing that out, Bill. Y'all were probably thinking that I was going to charge you part of that $3,000. Just in case you were thinking that, thanks for clearing that up, Bill. No, that we pull the research for you for free. No charge to you guys. It does take a couple of weeks to come in, though, so be prepared for that. We're working with you in the meantime. All right. So we're going to go ahead and start the presentation. This curriculum was created by Colin Kane, who's the director of the Entrepreneurship Training Program, through a grant of the Texas Workforce Commission, and it included collaboration with UTPA university professors, and it's been added to by our program staff, Bill and myself, and through some interactions with our other partners that we've used to put on this program. Wounded Warrior Project, Economic Growth Incubator has been just really great about providing insight into how to make it better, and we've taken some of their input and changed it a little bit. So that's where the program comes from. As I mentioned, it's funded by the Texas Veterans Commission, and the actual program that they have is called the Fund for Veterans Assistance. Just to give you a little idea of where that money comes from, y'all ever see those Veterans Cash scratch-off tickets? It's not funded, the program is not funded by any state money. It's funded by those scratch-off tickets, and also from a donation that Texas residents are able to give to the Texas Veterans Commission when they go renew your driver's license. There's a little thing under there that says, do you want to donate $1 or $5? And that's where all the money comes from for these programs. So this is not a taxpayer program, just as a disclaimer, I guess.
Where does that come from?
Where does what?
Because when you go to your driver's license,
Right.
they don't really charge you there, right? Did they actually get it from somewhere?
No, I guess I should clarify. Within that application, they have just an option where you can check and donate like $1 or $5. It doesn't automatically, like your driver's license fee to renew the $65, it doesn't come out of there. It comes out of an optional, you can check it and give another $1 or something like that. And then that goes into an account that the Texas Veterans Commission uses for this program. So this is an outline of what we're going to be doing. These are the subjects we're going to be covering for the first part, the first 3 sessions, and this is what's going to be coming in the second part. This early stuff is probably, for some of you that have a little bit of a business background, it might seem pretty basic, but rest assured, as we move into the second and third session, we're going to get into much more in-depth information. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be looking at my notes here periodically. I don't want to make sure I don't miss anything. As I mentioned, after this training and throughout, as we progress, week to week, I want you guys to keep in contact with us. And if you're ready to start working with us on your business plans right now, then we're going to set those appointments, and we're going to start working with you right now, one-on-one. So after we get done, or while we're on the breaks, for those of you that are here, if y'all want to start setting things up, hey, when can we come in? Then I'll let you know when we can talk at least about setting up your first appointment, and we'll move forward from there. This first module is a core. It's called Intro to Entrepreneurship. And the objectives are to the many reasons for going into business, compare the risks and rewards of small business ownership, and inform on how to manage your expectations before you open up. So you decided to go into business. You all should have asked yourself before, but in case you haven't, you should ask yourself now, why? Why do I want to do this to myself? Why would I want to go into business? Consider all of the pitfalls and everything that might happen, and the opportunity cost, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But this is something that you can only answer for yourself. Nobody else can answer it for you. This first presentation is going to give you a little bit of some tools to kind of organize your thoughts as you move through this exploratory process of why you should, or what type of thing you should undertake. These are some general reasons. This is according to Forbes 2011. Reasons for going into business, prior work experience. Maybe you were doing that before. This is the majority of entrepreneurs. They come from this category, prior work experience. If somebody was a truck driver and they said, I've been a truck driver for a while. I'm tired of taking orders from my boss. I want to go be my own boss. I want to open a brokerage. That's very typical. If somebody says, been working in the restaurant business all my life, I think I can own a restaurant. There are pitfalls with that, in that you are a domain expert. You know exactly what you're doing, but you might not have the business acumen. And that's one of the reasons this program is valuable, because we're going to give you a little bit of a foundation in that. The other one, which I think is probably a little bit higher now, that I like to highlight, is the downsized category, which is the lowest in this one, but I think it's probably a little higher now, because especially within the veterans community, we have a higher unemployment rate than the civilian unemployment rate. And also those of the military members that are transitioning out right now, some of them never intended to get out. With the downsizing of the forces and things like that, what we're seeing is people that anticipated that they were going to spend 20, 30 years in the military, maybe they're a staff sergeant or something like that, they got 16 in, they're just not re-upping them because the forces are being downsized. So, it comes from both sectors, the civilian sector and the military sector. So that's a very strange situation a lot of those military members find themselves in. These are the categories, and this is an important one to highlight because it's just, I like everybody to know that we're going to talk about some of the riskiest and some of the safest options a little later, but most of them actually come from this service category. And as you can see, it is the biggest industry breakdown for most entrepreneurs, and obviously retail trade is a large one other, and who knows what can be in the other non-classified ones. So the questions, as I mentioned earlier, what questions you need to ask yourself as you move forward. Do you have what it takes? Our business advisor, Bill, here sent us an article earlier this week, and it was talking about what it really takes to be an entrepreneur. And, you can ask yourself, do you fall into all these categories? A lot of times, a magazine article might purport that the most important thing is that you have to be innovative, or you have to be a hard worker, or you have to be a visionary. The article that Bill sent me said those are all just superfluous things. What's the main thing you need to be? And the answer that this article gave was courageous. Because it takes courage to do all this. It takes courage to forego a salary. It takes courage to dip into your 401k and then say, I just got to use it all. And then it's all gone. It takes courage to move forward if you have a family with no benefits, insurance benefits. It takes courage just to say, I'm going to try to do this even though I might fail. My credit might be horrible. How am I going to rebound from failing at this business idea? But one of the things to keep in mind is some of the people that are most successful at this have failed several times. I remember recently there was an expose on Donald Trump, and Donald Trump talked about how he'd made millions of dollars and lost it at least 4 times. So millions to broke to zero at least 4 times. And that's because he's obviously a great strategist, and he has a great execution of his plans. But the majority of, especially serial entrepreneurs, they don't become serial entrepreneurs because they were successful at every single time. They failed at 3 or 4 of them, and people even hired them more for the 5th one because they know this guy's already had maybe 2 or 3 that he messed up, but he was real close. He lasted 2 years in one of them. He made a couple million, and then it went down, or something like that. So it's important to keep in mind that courage is probably the most important thing. The next one is, do you have adequate resources? Do you have enough cash to move you from one step to another? As we're moving through these things and we look at Gantt charts and things like that and setting up timelines for what needs to happen now and what's going to happen in a month and what's going to happen at the quarterly and biannual basis, you need to make sure that you have enough money to move you from stage to stage. Sometimes people have a great plan, you have revenues coming in, and you just don't have enough to cover expenses from month to month because you didn't plan enough for it in the early stages. Do you have a unique product or service? There's a lot of industries that are commoditized right now that, everything that is sold within that industry, especially maybe within a region, it's the same. Everything's the same. Do you have differentiation within your industry is one of the biggest questions you need to ask yourself. If there's not an added value to buying your product versus the incumbent's product, then why would they do it? This is one of the most important questions you have to ask yourself. People might say, well, I'm going to set up in this area. Is that your differentiation piece? If it is, we need to expand on it, and that's going to be part of your marketing and sales strategy. If that's your only thing, and then we find out that there's 5 people within 3 miles of you, you need to throw that thing out. That's not That's not a differentiation anymore. You need to find what it is and exploit it. Are you a risk taker? How much money and time are you willing to risk? Are you a leader? Are you going to be willing to negotiate with vendors? Deal with bills and taxes and things like that. These are all questions you have to ask yourself. Are you willing to work long hours? You know, a lot of the problems that I've dealt with initially with some folks that come in with financial projections is that they set them up in a way that provides them with a pretty large salary early on, because especially if they're just getting out of the military. These guys, maybe staff sergeants and higher, maybe staff NCOs, they're making $40,000, $50,000, and they recognize that they need to keep their standard of living. So they say, I need to move straight from one thing to the next and keep those salaries the same. Well, a lot of times they're not going to be the same. One of the things that entrepreneurs in high growth, high revenue industries recognize is that you will have no salary for the first year, and if you're lucky, you'll have enough just like a stipend to live on. Now, I don't necessarily expect that the people listening to this presentation fall into that category, because what the majority of you and the folks that listen to the webinar want to do, you want to start a lifestyle business. So there's ways that you can bootstrap, and there's ways that you can prepare and plan for the lending that you're going to receive to prepare yourself for what needs to happen during those early stages. This is an activity. I just want you guys to think about this, and I'm going to give you a few minutes real quick. In y'all's books, you know, just on some of the, I should have given y'all some scratch paper, but just ask yourself these questions. Which one of these are you? Like, categorize yourself. Which one of these are you concerned with, and which one of these are you not concerned with? The questions I would ask myself first is, which one are you not? Because if you have all of the rest of them, and you think you do at least, then at least you'll know, I need to concentrate on these two. Because I've never been a leader, and I don't really think my product is, or me personally, I'm very competitive. So as you look at those, I would just address the question of, think about the ones that you are not, and apply kind of a SWOT methodology to figure out how you're going to fill in the gaps. A lot of times, as entrepreneurs, I don't know if y'all ever seen that Staples commercial that came out a couple of years ago, but there's a Staples commercial where the guy walks in and he looks at one of his employees and he says, "You got those sales reports?" And the employee's like, "I don't have those sales reports." And the employee's him. You know, he's just asking all these questions, and the guy is actually himself. So it's like, who's wearing all these hats? So a lot of times you're going to have to wear all those hats, but sometimes you just can't do it. Can you do bookkeeping and payroll? This is one of the ones I see most. Are you organized enough to do bookkeeping and payroll? At least recognizing that you're not is going to lead you to an answer of who's going to do it, because you can't do everything, obviously. That's one of the pitfalls that a lot of entrepreneurs fall into. They say, well, it's me, I'm the one-man show, I'm going to do everything. Well, that's fine at the early stages when you're doing the planning, because it's still at the idea stage. You're going to figure out who's going to do everything. But inevitably, you're going to have to figure out who performs each function. Does that mean that you're going to have to hire somebody on staff to do that job? Maybe not necessarily. There's staffing agency, there's all kinds of options. Maybe you can just say, well, we're not going to do this one thing because I don't have the infrastructure to support it yet, but we're going to do this in the second year. And that's the reason why we're not going to do it at first. So with this one right here at the bottom, are you willing to work long hours? Consider options that are going to fall into your requirements for what you think long hours are. I could ask any number of people, hey, what do you think long hours are, Aurelio? And he could say, I'll tell you what, man, 35 hours is steep. I'm not doing more than 35 hours at all for any reason. And somebody else's idea of long hours would be like, well, I'm not doing more than 80. I got to cut it off at 80 hours. I'm willing to do 80 a week. You need to decide how many you're willing to put into it and look for things that fall into those ranges. Because obviously everybody has different notions of what long hours are. And if we start talking about something and you say, you know, I got about 45, 50 hours to, and if I know, and other industry, you know, experts that we've talked to say, man, this is at least for the first 6 months, you're talking 80, 90 hours a week. Then you have to be able to make a decision that's a go or a no-go decision. The hardest thing at these early stages for people to do is say no-go in their own minds. In our own minds, people don't like to give up their ideas, especially after you start working on these plans. Right now, you guys might not have an actual business plan yet, like an actual stack of papers that's a business plan. But let's say you already did. Let's say you are in that category where you've been working on this for 6 months, putting in the time, the sweat equity. You've been researching, talking to people, looking up information on costs, doing vendor vetting, all this type of stuff. And let's say you show your idea to Bill, and then me and Bill sit down with you, and we see all these things that maybe should have been addressed by now. And we say, well, given these three things, I think you need to, readdress these issues and find out if you can move forward. Sometimes, even when it's a lost cause, a client might say, "No, and we've been there. We've had clients actually start up after that, and then it's not necessarily always a good outcome. But they might say, "No, I'm going to just go ahead and move forward, and we'll see what's going to happen." If you're not willing to give the no-go decision, then you're putting yourself at a loss for those that early planning stage. You're not giving yourself enough ammo to really look at an idea and vet it appropriately. It's kind of like the ugly baby scenario. Everybody know about that ugly baby scenario? So, if you have a baby, your business plan, if you've worked on it for 6 months, it becomes like a baby. And nobody wants another guy to call their baby ugly. And me telling you your business plan is no good is like telling you have an ugly baby. Hey, that baby's ugly. It looks great to you because it's your baby. It's like when people show you the pictures. Look at that baby. And you say, oh, Jesus Christ. Well, of course it looks good to you. It's yours. But you have to get that input from everybody else to find out, is this a good-looking baby? And sometimes that business plan is just no good and you got to throw it away. I'm not saying throw babies away, but I'm saying you just got to throw the business plan away sometimes and move forward with another idea. So these are business survival rates for the 2 and 4 and 6 year time points. And one of the statistics we probably all heard a lot is that there's only a 10% survival rate for business. Everybody heard that? If you have, it's true. But the 10% is at 10 years. So that's still a viable statistic, and it's still true today. It's been true for probably 100 years. It fluctuates from year to year. It might go up to 12 or go down to 8, but its average is about 10% at the 10-year mark. And if you've already been in business for 4 years, you can say to yourself, I've beat out half of the people that started at the same time I did. But if you're under 2 years, you're in that danger zone. You're in that flying high. I need to make sure I'm doing everything right, danger zone. One of the key things that you can do, the key activities, is to make sure customers are happy. Always make sure customers are happy. Now, used to be that everybody would say, I know we've all heard this, the customer's always right. The customer's always right. Everybody remember hearing that? For probably for about the last at least 15 years, that's what I've been hearing from everybody in a business academic setting anyway. What do you guys think about that? You think the customer's always right? What do y'all think? Couple yays, couple nays. I'll tell you what, it's about 50-50 because 80%, typically, this is a statistic from an academic study recently, 80% of some companies' customers are never right. They're just causing trouble. They're just causing you pains and agony that you don't really need. It's part of this 80-20 theory. So what you really need to do is get rid of the ones that are causing you the trouble and keep the ones that are good because they fall into the things that you do. If you provide two services, let's say that you sell shoes and you sell T-shirts, and your T-shirt sales are great because everybody comes in, they love your designs, they buy the T-shirt, they leave. It's no problems. It's a beautiful situation. But your shoes, it's just a headache every time, and you think, well, this is part of my business model. I have to keep the shoes. But the shoes are taking up all your employees' time. They're complaining. They got to go and show them how the shoes fit and lace them up and stuff like that. If that sector is causing more trouble than it's worth, one of the things that you can do that's part of new theory, I guess you would call it, is get rid of those customers. It's called firing those customers. You got to fire them. You got to get rid of them so that the rest of your business can grow. So that's one of the things you can do as an add-on to this whole theory that customers are always right. Not all customers are always right. That's just like saying all parents are good parents or all babies are good looking. That's just not true. Some of those customers, you just got to let them go. Any questions so far? Anybody? We're almost done with this first section here, and then we'll take a little break. Okay, so why do businesses fail? This is a function of goals and expectations, I think. You know, if you look at doing a debrief for yourself at your 6 month and 1 year point, and you really don't know how your business is doing, that's usually a function of you didn't know where you wanted to be at 6 months and 1 year. If you don't know, you might be at 9 months and you might have no idea how you're doing. I had a client about 2 years ago. He started doing great. He was about 9 months. He said, we're moving too quick. I thought we were going to have like 3 or 4 clients. This is a problem that a lot of people would like to have. I'll preface this story by saying that. I'm moving too quick. I don't have any insurance for my employees. They're asking me for insurance. I need all of this infrastructure stuff. I don't even have payroll ready to set up. I don't even have QuickBooks. I have no accounting system. I'm making about $200,000 a month. And he's just not. He doesn't know where he's at. He's 6 months in. He's almost at the $1 million mark. He did IT cybersecurity, by the way. That's one of those high growth industries that I was talking about. Not all of us are going to have these great problems, right? But that's the other side of, you need to create your goals and expectations early on. Where do I want to be at the 1 year? Where do I want to be at the 2 year point? And you have to have that frame of thought as you're developing your plan, not just your financial projections. When we create financial projections, we create them for like about 2 years, sometimes 3 years out. And that's because that's what a lender wants to see. But it also should be something that you want to know, because you want to be able to judge and vet how you're doing at particular milestones through your operations. At some point, hopefully, inevitably, if you do get started, you're going to get started and you're going to be in operations mode. You're not going to be in this whole, I'm planning to do this and I want to do this. Then you're going to be worrying about, how are we going to move month to month? How are we going to increase sales? Where are we going to go from here? And you need to have kind of a plan. That's what the business plan serves as well. It should serve as an organic document that evolves over time, that you're using as a benchmark to say, oh, look, we thought we were going to be at 150,000 by 12 months, and we're actually at 230,000. I think that might be why we're having problems with staffing not being enough. This is clear. We need to hire at least a part-timer now, because if we keep trending like this, we're going to be in real bad shape if we don't get at least one person on by next month or something like that. The other thing, insufficient capital. The one thing I highlight in here is, have you done an accurate assessment of break-even sales? One of the things you have to know is, at every month, how much is it costing you to operate? And that's also termed the burn rate. What's your burn rate? How much money are you burning through every month just to operate? And it includes all of your variable expenses and fixed expenses. And sometimes you're going to want to include things in the variable that other industries, other companies won't. Sometimes you're going to have to include sales staff, and another company might not need to, because you're the sales guy and you don't pay yourself, like I said earlier. But sometimes you have to put a little bit of money in there to pay yourself, because you have to say, well, I mean, if this is the bare minimum, I need to pay rent. So then you put your salary in there. Or if you need to be covered by workers' compensation, if you're doing, like if you have a sole prop, but you need to be covered by workers' compensation because you do landscaping work and you might chop a toe off out there with a lawnmower or something, then you have to be in there and you have to account for that expense of having you on payroll. Make sure that you keep in mind that each month there's a certain amount of money that goes out, and you want to know what that is per month. You're also basing it on ebbs and flows and what you consider the sales to be. If you have one of those businesses, that sells, actually, I was thinking of the one that sells Halloween costumes. Those ones that pop up all over the place. They're in a warehouse and sell Halloween costumes. Well, your burn rate in March is not what your burn rate is in October and September. So you need to know what is it for this particular period and how many sales do I need to make to match it. So if your burn rate in September is $2,000 a month with rent and everything, that's really low. It would never be that. But let's just say it's $2,000. Then how many costumes do you need to sell in September to make sure that at least you're breaking even? I've seen that a lot of times with clients before that had maybe coffee shops. How much do you need to make? If you're not making it every month, you're in the red. You're slipping. You're slipping every month. By the time you hit 6-7 months, you've slipped 6 months in a row. Now you're in a bad spot. So you really want to give yourself a little bit of cushion too, to know what is it going to take for me to reach that. Also gives you a little cushion to figure out when you can take some rest for yourself. If you've already reached a week and you say, well, we're good for this week, I think I'm good. Now you might actually able to, go hang out with your kids or something like that. If not, you just stay in there. You got to make sure you hit that mark. So understand expenses and working capital. Let's move forward. So this is a list according to Forbes as well. I think it was in 2011. It's a little bit dated, but they pretty much remain the same year over year. And these are the riskiest businesses to get into. It's not a complete list, but it's definitely something to think about.
What do you consider personal services?
Personal services could be anything like dog walkers or anything obtuse like that. It's a broad catch-all type of category, so I'm not really sure. It could, if you think of anything, I'll tell you whether it would count in that. But it's something like dog watching, maybe a personal assistant, maybe somebody that does laundry for you or something like that. That's those type of services. But these are things that Forbes categorizes the riskiest, and as you can see, most of them fall into the service category. And these are the ones that are the safest. I like to highlight accounting services there because there's a lot of outsourcing going on, but small and medium-sized companies, and especially large companies, they are unwilling to outsource this function because if you think about it, it makes sense. Why would you want to outsource? Because, people are outsourcing things to Pakistan and Afghanistan, mainly Pakistan right now and India. Why would you want to outsource your financial information to somebody that's across the world? You want to have that guy in the room. If it's Chuck doing your accounting, you want to be able to walk up to Chuck and say, "What's up with these numbers, Chuck? I thought it looked good, and it does not look good." And then you want to be able to interact with him about what's going on with those. So legal services and dental and other things like that. So this is a little activity for us again. Look at those two categories and think about what they have in common and what's different about these two groups. So we'll go back real quick. The one thing that I noticed about all of these in the first category, let's go back. No, what I would say, you think they're luxuries? I don't think they're luxuries.
But it depends on how much money you have to spend to buy clothes.
Right, that could be it. Maybe you have a point there. They might be dependent upon the economy. You might say they're very contingent upon the state of the economy. The other thing I notice about these is they're very ubiquitous. You see them everywhere. Don't we see those everywhere? You see these food stores, auto repairs everywhere. Trucking is part of, it's a commoditized industry. Trucking is necessary for everything that we have. Transportation, restaurant and bars. We walk outside right now, go a mile, and there'll be restaurant and bars everywhere. The other thing I notice about all of them is that they are, there's a high cost of doing business. They're very high cost of doing business and low margins. If you think about those first two categories, especially restaurants and bars, they're very low margin, particularly restaurants. That's why restaurants always teeters back and forth for the number one worst business to open because they have more closures every year than any other business. You have to pay real close attention to your staffing and your margins on the food. Sometimes you're not making any money on the plates, and unless you have somebody that has a lot of experience in figuring out how to quantify how much each plate is costing you, you're in bad shape. We put things on sale. I go to restaurants all the time. Tell me if any of you guys have ever done this. I go to restaurants all the time, and I walk in. I say, "I'll take the fajita plate." And then the bill comes, and fajita plate looks great. And the fajita plate's like $6.99, and I tell myself, there's no way they made any money off of this fajita plate because it costs probably $7.39, at the minimum. So if you're losing money every time you put in a plate of food on the table, then you're in a bad spot. One of the other things I notice about these safest ones is their need-based. People need these things. They have to have these things. Nobody says, "You know what I really want to do? I really want to go get some legal services today." That sounds like a great time. I'm going to go. I'm going to go to the pool first to put myself in a good mood. It's going to be a party. It's going to be awesome. Good times. Nobody ever says that. Nobody ever says I'm going to the doctor's office because that's just a place to be. All my buddies are going to be there. These are very need-based. People need these things. That's why they're the safest ones. They're going to continue year over year, over time, to be the ones that are the safest because they're low cost and high profit, and everybody needs them. Yes, sir.
I think it's significant to note that neither one of those lists have IT or construction.
That is a good point. Write that down. IT is one I usually talk about. IT is probably because this is a little bit dated list. IT is one of the biggest ones that I've had several clients recently working in. Right. Well, the other thing that I noticed about the SAFE list is that it's very it's skill based. So all these things require high skills. So I definitely put IT. I usually put IT in the safest. Folks that have done cybersecurity and stuff like that in the past, they usually do well. We're going to talk about risk and rewards when we get back because I'm running out of time. We got 2 slides left in this one. But let's go ahead and take a break, 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. And I have 2, and then Bill's going to start on his. Thank you. Okay, so to continue where we left off, one of the next things you're going to want to address is risk versus rewards and the alternatives. One of the main considerations here is opportunity costs. So an opportunity cost is the cost of foregoing what you could have been doing by undertaking a particular plan of action. And this is huge, I think, because even when you think about the research and things like that, the time wasted, it might seem like if you do research and you're into it for 3 weeks, you're going to learn something from that maybe ill-advised undertaking, but it's still time that you lost that you could have been doing research on another plan or something like that. Also, the opportunity cost of other things not related to business that you could have been doing. You could have been spending time with your family. You could have been working at a regular job. Could have been getting benefits and could have been applying for some job in Alaska because that's where you've always wanted to live. It could be any number of things. But it's important to consider those things. And these are some of the risks listed here that are associated with going into business. One of them might be credit. I like to highlight the one for credit because especially in the high growth industry, Techcom and things like that, for those folks, they're not the ones that are going to get all the credit a lot of time if they're the initial investors. And later on down the line, for all of us that are even looking into lifestyle businesses, we have to look at it in terms of, do you want the company to be success or do you want to be in control? There's always the comparison between do you want to be rich or do you want to be the king? Because they're not the same thing. You can be the king, but you're not going to be the richest guy sometimes. Or you can be rich, but you're not going to be the king. Nobody's going to be praising you. You're just going to be sitting over there on the side, just enjoying your money. So the credit comes into play in those terms, and it also comes into play with, are you able to recognize that you need to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you in order to get this thing done? And sometimes people are not willing to let go of enough control. I worked with one recently, and a founder of a Techcom company, and he was the CEO, which is usually the case when you start up a tech company. But usually the case as well is that at some point, usually early on, you have to fire yourself. That's what you have to do. And it's really hard for people to let go of those reins. Are you willing to say, well, look at yourself in the mirror and say, this guy's not good anymore. You're not doing what you need to do. You're fired. Now you're the chief technology officer, but you're not going to be making any big decisions over here. Now, for those of us that are going to be doing these lifestyle businesses, that might not be the case with development of the strategy of the business, but it will be the case in terms of you having somebody in charge of accounting and payroll and what's going on with the finances. So you're going to have to divest yourself of certain things and move forward after that. Give me a sec here. Moving on to the rewards. This is the average pre-tax profit. It's around 15%, just across all industries. For some it's more and for some it's less. And it's important to keep that in mind because as we're developing financial projections, if you recognize, depending on which approach you go with, whether you're putting yourself as a salaried employee or if you're just going to take owner draw, if you recognize that based on the plans that we've developed, you're not going to make enough at the end of the year to support what you think you need, then that is one of those cases that I mentioned before. It's a no-go. You have to move forward. I've had a couple of clients that are really good at it. They just get rid of that program. They say, well, this one's worthless, and they throw it away. I have one client, I did it with him 3 times, 3 different ones. The whole thing, did about 3 months worth, threw it away. Did another one, came in, totally different business. Did the whole thing, nope, throw it away. And you know, if you're willing to do that, you're going to find something that when you actually get into it, it's probably going to be a better fit. But if you're not willing to do it, it's going to be that one of those situations that I mentioned before. You might get started and find you're not making enough money to support what you need to do. This is pre-tax, so also think about if you're making the profit. Let's say that all else being equal, as has been said, if you are making the profit after you have the pre-tax, let's say at the end of the year, or let's go with yearly. At the end of the year, you've made $50,000. You're like, wow, that's awesome. I made $50,000. Now you're going to get taxed on that $50,000. Now you've really made $35,000. No, not really. That 42. But if you need to be at 50 and you're really only going to take home 42, then you're in a situation. These are some of the alternatives that are listed, and I'm going to mention one more as well. So a lot of this is a situation. I'm going to give a lot of examples from technology-based businesses because I read a lot about that. But I watched a webinar recently, and they were talking about things that you should do when you're preparing to go into a technology-based business. And one of the instructors said, don't go to Techcrunch. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this, but it's a website. And basically Techcrunch just gives updates on what's going on in the technology industry. But the reason he said not to do it is because it just tells you how great it is to be in the technology industry. And he's out there to tell everybody it's not great, it's not all easy, it's super hard. You're going to have sleepless nights, you're going to be eating bad food, you're going to have indigestion, it's going to be bad, at least for some of the time. It's not all, puffy clouds and roses. It's important to recognize that. And it's important to recognize you could be doing something else. You could be investing in some T-bills or some CDs. You got $10,000. Nobody says you have to put $10,000 into a business. You could say, hey, let me put it in this. Somebody told me the other day the best rate of returns right now are in whole life. Somebody just told me that. You get 4 or 5% from whole life. You could say, yeah, just let me start paying whole life insurance and put a little extra in there. They let you put a little extra every year. That could be my best option. But since we're in a business training class, I will tell you one of the options that I see as very viable as well, an option to dropping everything and starting a business. Some of you might be at a point where you want to quit your job. You'd be surprised how many times I get calls from clients and they're right at that point where they say, we need to develop this plan because I have a job. I don't like my job. I need to get out of this job. And then I usually end up talking to them a little bit, but wow, why don't you like the job? And they'll tell me the number of reasons. Maybe a client is a cop and he's been a cop too long, or maybe you've been in the teaching industry all your life. You want to do something else. One of the options, and I recommend this a lot, and a lot of the literature I read these days is I guess about this subject matter, is to start something where you can keep your full-time job and minimize the risk. Leverage the security that you have as you get started, and start it up. And be a full-time worker and a part-time business owner. So that's one of the things that I would recommend looking into as you move forward if you don't already have your idea set in concrete. As I mentioned, everybody's in a different situation. Only you can answer that question. I've had many that say, nope, this is what I'm going to do. And we'll help you either way. I mean, I can recall one that we had about 6 months ago. And we did all the research and found out all the information. I said, so nothing I can tell you is going to make you not want to do this. And he said, nope. I'm doing it anyway. We're going. We're moving. We're on this train track. I said, all right, and then we can just help you with your financial projections, develop your business plan. We'll do a SWOT analysis, look at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, just so you know what they are. Because more important than anything, I think, for what we do as, this is a veterans program, I'm not trying to create, starts. I'm not trying to, hey, you start one and you start one. Let's all just start one. I'd be much happier if 2 of you start one that actually is successful over time, and maybe 30% of you, because these are more realistic statistics, 30% of the people that are watching this or in this class, it's just not for you maybe. It's just, or maybe it's not the right time. Sometimes that's a situation. Maybe you don't have enough time to contribute right now, and then in 5 years you're going to be completely ready. In which case, I'll tell you, maybe that's something that you should look into. But as you're moving forward, consider that secondary hybrid option of working and doing the business part-time as something that could be viable. along those lines, a lot of franchises are looking at that model and creating franchise opportunities that speak to that. So franchising is something we're going to talk about later. We might actually even have somebody, our local franchise guy, come in. But either way, we're going to get a little bit more into franchising. Franchising is a great option for veterans, especially because it's a follow-on to everything we learned in the military. In the military, where would you know one thing that I'm sure all of us remember from the military? Whatever it is, they give you a manual for it. Here you go. Here's your manual. Go read it. Go figure it out. You don't have to put any thought into that whole thing. You do it. Here's the manual. You execute. And that's one of the reasons military or veterans are really good at franchising opportunities. Anybody got any questions on that? Lastly, manage expectations. There's a difference between what you expect and what it actually is. The main thing that you want to do here at the early stages is talk to as many people as you can that are in that industry that you want to go into. There's a couple of ways to do that. The first and best one, I would say, is to contact the Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Corp wherever you are, because they have groups and they have meetings where they can introduce you to local business owners and they can put you in that network base. Also, there's associations. I mean, those are who can help you locally, but that might be a mixed hodgepodge of people that are in construction and then people that have high-tech industries and restaurant owners, which is great because you're going to get a lot of different feedback from a lot of different perspectives. But you also want industry specific. What's going on in this industry right now? And for that, you're going to want to contact associations. Associations are one of the best and least tapped resources out there for aspiring business owners. And basically, there's associations for everything. I look them up all the time for clients. There's associations for archery Association of Wisconsin, Archery Association of the Midwest, Asphalt Pavers of Michigan, Asphalt Pavers of Texas. There's all associations for everything. They're usually nonprofits. They usually collect data and aggregate it, and they usually love to give it away. They're not, in many cases, that's the only thing they do. They collect the data and they give it away. Sometimes they're members. So you might come across certain situations where you're going to look up associations and they're going to say, sure, we'd love to help you out. We'd love to give you some of this information, but you have to become a member and it's $10, $50 a month or something like that. That's up to you whether you want to pay the $10, $50 to be a member. I'm a member of a couple of things because I feel that there's value in them. One of them I pay $25 a month right now, but it gives great modules and I watch them all the time and they're about 30 minutes each and I see the value in it. But that doesn't mean you have to pay because for every association that charges something, there's probably 5 that charge you nothing. So keep in mind that those are great resources and some of the times they're absolutely free. Get a job in the industry is another way to find as much out as you can. I've had clients, the best one I can remember is I had a guy that was a pilot in the military. You know, you're a pilot, lots of leadership experience, management experience, strategy development. You know, this guy could probably do anything he wanted. And he came and what he wants to do is open a coffee shop, but he didn't know anything about coffee. Maybe he knows about, probably what I know and a lot of us know. He knows how to order it and how to make it just the way he wants it, but he didn't know anything about it. So even for a guy like that, I would have to recommend, hey, you need to go and work in a coffee shop. Be a assistant manager, learn how to do barista, training and stuff like that. And I've had other clients, I mentioned coffee shop because we've had a couple, and I've had other clients that open a coffee shop and they went into it and they said, well, we already got done with our barista training. We got our certificates. We're ready to go, move to the next step. So you have to have some type of background in that industry. Preferably, it should be broad and extensive background in that industry. If you know about video games, you should not be trying to create a medical device. It's pretty straightforward. You got to stay, I think a lot of us have probably heard it before. Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. If you're trying to get out of your lane and go do something over here in this industry that you know nothing about, that does not to say that you're not going to be successful, but you have to have a really good supporting cast. You got to have all these maybe board of advisors, board of directors that are advising you. Maybe some of your staff just retired from that industry. Maybe somebody that you know is going to be your manager. He just retired from a medical equipment company and he's gonna be your partner, but he's not really gonna do anything. I mean, those type of things will put you in good stead, but if you don't have those things in place, you're probably, it's going to be much more challenging to get into those industries. And lastly, do the research. As Bill said, we can help you with that primary research, with that secondary research. But one of the things I tell people that everybody hates to hear this part. So y'all get ready, because this is the worst part of my presentation, and it's the end. So I get to get done and leave y'all upset. You have to do primary research. You cannot just lean on secondary research. You have to actually go ask people, are you willing to buy this from me, and get some feedback from them. And that involves surveys in a couple of different forms, and we're going to talk about that later as well. Surveys and interviews. So what does that involve when you really think about it? I just cringe when I hear surveys. I'm like, this is so horrible, man. It's just an ugly thing to a lot of people. And for me too, they're hard. You have to be used to rejection. And if you're not used to rejection, you got to get used to it real quick when you start doing surveys, because you're going to get a lot of them. I don't want to do that. I don't want one. No, I donated last week. They're just going to tell you to get away from them a lot of times. So you have to get your feet wet somewhere. Where I always tell people to get their feet wet with just getting in the habit of doing surveys and interviews is start with your friends and family. Like start with your mom and your sister and stuff like that. But then after you get done and you kind of feel okay about doing it, throw theirs away because they don't count, because they love you too much. They're just going to they're going to tell you everything you want to hear. Yes, you're doing great, son. It's beautiful. Go out and make a lot of money. It's going to be great. You're going to do good. I'm sure you're going to kill everybody else in the industry. So that's just to get you in the habit of, asking the questions, writing the answers down. But then you get rid of those and move to the much more broader and expanding networks. And you can do a hybrid of online and then some face-to-face. And it's really going to involve you deciding who you should be asking questions to, asking those questions, and then integrating their feedback into developing your strategy for your product or service. It's going to change as you move through those things, but this secondary research does not give you everything. It can't possibly. It's just too broad. It's too much about the general. It's macro, it's not micro, and you need macro and micro as you move forward. All right, here's a summary of this first session. We talked about reasons for going into business, why businesses fail, risk versus rewards, and a little bit about managing expectations. Any questions?
I just have a comment.
Sure. Yes, sir.
I learned this the hard way with my daughter. Some people are just not cut out to be entrepreneurs.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
The stress of ownership is something that is insidious, and you have to address that issue.
Oh, sure.
We had the list of things, but that your character enters into it is really as a small business person.
That's a great point, sir. And Chuck brings up a good point there, and it's a lead into what I mentioned earlier about we got 10 people in this room, 3 or 4 you just 3 or 4 of us, I'll put myself in there, are just not going to do it. You're just not. It's not for you. Maybe you like going to an 8 to 5. Maybe you don't have the temperament. That's a great point, Chuck. I was going to tell a little story about that. I used to deal with inventors all the time, and inventors are notoriously, maybe it's because they're the makers of the world, notoriously difficult to work with. They just, they don't want to interact with the client, and if you put them in a focus group and then you start telling them what's wrong with their product, they're just going to get upset and tell you don't know what you're talking about. This is the greatest product ever made. I made it. This is my product. It's beautiful. I'm the genius here. And usually they are geniuses. Usually they are, so it makes it even harder. And they might be college professors or PhDs or scientists of some sort. So, you have a good point there. And that's a lead into, are you able to fire yourself as a CEO at some point? Because at some point, these guys need to go into a technology position. One of my old professors at UT used to say, you need to put that guy in a room and let him tinker with stuff. He can't be talking to people because, you never know what's going to happen if he starts talking to people. So you need to know, are you that guy? If you are, there's nothing wrong with it. You're the maker. You know what you're doing. You're the guy that comes up with the actual products that people want. But maybe you're not good at that one thing, that sales piece. And that doesn't mean you can't be involved with the business, but maybe that means you're just going to be the guy that's sitting in the technology part of it and also collecting the money if you're one of the founders. So great point there, Chuck. Any other questions? All right, we're done with my part. Bill's going to go ahead and take over now. Give us a sec here so we can move into this second module.
Okay, my name is Bill Lickman. I'm a small business advisor here at the Veterans Business Outreach Center. Give you a little bit of background about myself. I have a bachelor's in business from Baylor University. I have an MBA from Pan American, and I have a master's in accounting from the University of Phoenix. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the startup steps, compliance, and legal issues. Some of the objectives of this module is I'm going to describe the various business structures, explain how to find out what licenses and permits you may need for your business, and inform you of resources available for further assistance. What is the best business structure? First, let me kind of define business structure for you guys. Business structures is the organizational framework of the business. So the four main types of business structures are the sole proprietorship, the partnership, the corporation, and the limited liability company. And I will briefly tell you some pros and cons of each one of those and explain to you. The sole proprietorship, everybody's seen it. It's one person, one owner, and they have all the responsibilities. The one person owns the assets, pays the debts, keeps the profits, runs the business. Some of the advantages of a sole proprietorship is it's easy to organize, and it's inexpensive, and it's used by the majority of startups. By inexpensive is easy to start up. Most people can start up a sole proprietorship just by going and registering at the courthouse. It takes maybe like $15, and that's all it takes to start up a sole proprietorship. Some of the disadvantages, there's no legal separation between business and owner, and unlimited liability. And what I mean by that is, let's say you decide to start up a sole proprietorship, just a small business by yourself, and somebody hurts themselves or you hurt them in the course of business, they can sue you for everything you have except for like your essentials to live on. And I would get more into that, but it'd be better to talk to a lawyer about something like that, some kind of legal issues. But like, let's say you've got 10 acres of land that you just have as an investment property. If somebody gets hurt in your sole proprietorship, they can take those 10 acres. The court can make you sell those 10 acres and pay the person that's injured. So that's one of the major disadvantages. The next company is a partnership, and a partnership is two or more persons associated to carry on a for-profit business. And some of the advantages there is it's easy to organize, and it has the ability to raise more capital than sole proprietorships. And this, basically the partnership is a lot like the sole proprietorship, and that in order to form one, all you really need to do is go down to the courthouse and register the company. It's more easy to raise capital because there's more than one person. Here there's two people. There may be three people, something like that. We talk about having a partnership agreement. It's very important that you have a partnership agreement. When I started up a company that I worked for or that I owned, I had a partnership, and we started a partnership with an agreement. And come to find out, I did all the work and she didn't do any of the work. But since we had the agreement, it was real easy to figure out who did what was I supposed to do, what was she supposed to do, and we terminated the partnership. Some of the disadvantages to partnerships, it's unlimited responsibility for all partners. Partners are jointly and individually liable for actions of others. Just to give you a brief explanation of that, I had two people, they wanted to start up a partnership together, and they were getting into medical devices. And one of them wanted to make sure, well, if I get sued for doing something wrong, is it going to harm my buddy that I start my partnership with? And the answer was yes, it was. There's other organizations like the Limited Liability Partnership. And I'll go over limited liability companies a little bit later. But limited liability companies and limited liability partnerships are kind of the same thing. And one other disadvantage is it's difficult to transfer business ownership in case of disagreement or death of one of the partners. And we bring up this disadvantage, and it's better to talk to a lawyer anytime you want to get into a partnership, because I've had people where, I've heard cases where two people got together and formed a partnership, like let's say two mechanics got together and started up an auto repair shop, and then one of the mechanics dies, and now all of a sudden that one mechanic is in business with his other partner's wife. So basically, you need to have an agreement where maybe if that does happen, one partner buys out the other partner. Or maybe there's a death benefit. Maybe they have to buy an insurance policy. Like I said, the best person to get in touch with and talk to about that is a lawyer. The next type of business is a corporation. Corporations are legal entities created by statutory requirements. They have shareholders. The owners are limited in their liability. And what I mean there is basically the ownership of a corporation is the shareholders. And so there can be many different shareholders. There just doesn't have to be one or five or something like that. There can be hundreds of different shareholders. Limited owner responsibility for business debts. Let's say you do have a business or a corporation, and the corporation goes bankrupt. The most that you can lose is how much you have invested in the stock. They cannot come after your house or that 10 acres of land that you have for investment. They can only take what's in the business. Disadvantages is it's costly to create. It may require the help from lawyers. Like I said, basically when you start up a corporation, the corporation needs what's called Articles of Confederation, and they need bylaws. And another thing is when you start up a corporation, you have to go through the Secretary of State. So in this case, the Secretary of State's in Austin, and I'll talk a little bit more about the website that you can go through. And you actually have to fill out a form because corporations are what they consider legal entities, which means they're another person just like you are. So they're complex to organize. Like I said, most corporations have to have articles of incorporation and bylaws. And another disadvantage is double taxation. Basically, since corporations are a separate entity, they get taxed on their profit by the IRS. So let's say that you own a corporation and the corporation has $100,000 of profit. The IRS is going to tax that. Say they tax it at 30%. So now you only have $70,000. Now say you own 100% of that corporation. You just happen to own 100%, and you want that whole $70,000 to come to you. Then you have to put that $70,000 on your tax return, and you get taxed probably an additional. Right now the rate's like 15%, unless you make over $250,000, and I just changed, and I don't know the number for that. But that's what double taxation is, and you'll see that mostly in corporations. The last one is limited liability company. Like I said, this is also real similar to the limited liability partnership. It's designed to limit the liability feature, to have the limited liability feature of the corporation and the tax efficiencies of the partnership. Like I said, some of the advantages is the owners have limited personal liability for business debts, and they participate in management. Profit and loss can be allocated differently than ownership interest. and IRS rules allow limited liability corporations to choose between being taxed as a partnership or a corporation. And let me talk a little bit about that. One of the advantages here is the limited liability part of a limited liability company. Basically, like let's say that 10 acres that you have for investment, if you have a limited liability company, they can't touch that. All they can sue you for is what you have invested in that company. They can't touch any of your personal assets. Profit and loss can be allocated differently than ownership interest. Usually when you have a partnership, and let's say you have a 50-50 partnership, whatever profits you make are distributed to the partners 50-50. When you have a limited liability company, you can say something to the effect that, well, this partner gets 80%, this partner gets 10%, and this partner gets 10%. Even though all three of y'all own the same amount of money, the 33%. The IRS, here the last one of the advantages is the IRS rules allow limited liability companies or corporations to choose between being taxed as a partnership or a corporation. And we talked about some of the, basically a partnership, the income is what they call pass-through. And so it goes from the partnership, it doesn't get taxed by the partnership, but you do have to file it's a 1065 tax return. And it's just more like an information tax return. And all the profits get put on your tax return, your 1040. So let's say that you made $100,000 in a partnership, then that whole $100,000 gets transferred to your 1040. And you pay your tax rate on it. Now, a corporation, we already said, well, if it makes $100,000 and gets taxed 30% at the corporate rate, and then you have to pay another 15%, then really you've only made $70,000 minus the 15%. So that's one of the advantages of a limited liability company or a limited liability partnership. Some of the disadvantages is it's more expensive to create than partnerships or sole proprietorships. And in that, what I mean is a limited liability company is kind of like a corporation, and that you have to register it with the Secretary of State in Austin. Another disadvantage is our state laws for creating limited liability companies may not reflect the latest federal tax changes. So they may say, well, you need to do this, but the IRS may say you need to do something different. And usually the IRS trumps whatever the state says. So to register a business, sole proprietorships, and partnerships, the courthouse at Cameron County is in Brownsville. The courthouse in Hidalgo County is in Edinburgh. The courthouse for Starr County is in Rio Grande City. The courthouse for Willacy County is in Raymondville. And these are the numbers. Now, it could be anywhere, any state, throughout the state, you all have courthouses in every different county. So, with corporations, like I said, it needs to be registered, or corporations or limited liability companies or limited liability partners need to register with the Texas Secretary of State in Austin. So, this is some additional information. Visit www.business. This has kind of changed. I went to it this morning. It's www.business.usa.gov, and they have some real good startup tools. Just ask you some simple questions that you can use to figure out what form of business is best for you. The other thing you can do to start your business is consult with your CPA or your lawyer and find out what's the best form of business for you. It's important that you think carefully about these things when you decide what kind of business structure you want to be. What kind of ownership and management structure are you going to have? What's your potential for liability? Is somebody going to get injured with what y'all do? Like say somebody simple like a coffee shop, somebody might slip on the floor and sue the coffee shop. If you're a sole proprietorship, they can sue you for what you have in the bank and also what you have invested. If you're a corporation, then they can probably sue the corporation just for what you have in the corporation. Another thing to think about is tax treatment. How's it going to be treated? We talked about sole proprietorships and partnerships, how a lot of the profit is taxed as a pass-through. For corporations, it's double taxed. And for limited liability companies and limited liability partnerships, you can choose between the two, how you want to be taxed. So we talked a little bit about the expenses and the formalities associated with setting up and maintaining the different structures. And at the bottom it says you can always change the structure later. So if you are a sole proprietorship, you can always become a partnership. If you're a partnership, you can always change to be an LLC or an LLP, or you can always change to be a corporation. It's a lot harder to go the other way. Once you start a corporation, it's a lot harder to become a partnership. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's a lot harder. So this is the activity that we're going to do. Basically, we're not going to break up into groups of 3. One of the question is, you are about to start a restaurant with your wife or husband in the Rio Grande Valley, and you plan on putting all the business profits in your joint bank account for household expenses. Your business is also fully insured. What business formation would you choose and why? And this could be anything that you guys are looking at. It's real important to think about what we're talking about, the different types of ownership and management structure that you're looking at. What's your liability going to be? What's your tax treatment of the profits that you make? What are your expenses for forming the company? Things like that. It all makes a difference. There's no right or wrong answer here. They could all be the same. It's just, these are the things that you have to consider when you want to form a business. So, all right. The next thing we're going to talk about is how do you know if you need any permits or special licenses? And we're going to talk about business registration, kind of what we already talked about. Special licenses that you may need to start a business, depending on what you're going to do. Zoning and occupancy permits, taxes, and other issues. Special licenses. Basically, this is a website for special licenses for the state of Texas. It's the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulations. Their website is www.license.state.texas.us. Now, they do have quite a few licenses on there, but they don't cover all of them. And by that, I mean there's a Texas Department of Insurance that you have, because you have to have a license to sell insurance. You have to have a license to do mortgages, things like that. There's a Texas Department of Savings and Mortgage Lending, I believe it is. So, but this is for the primary types of special licenses that you need. And this is just an example of some of them. Daycare, adult daycare, child daycare, home health care, beauty shops. Everybody's been to like a beauty shop or a barber and seen that little license that they have to display. You have to be licensed by the state of Texas in order to be to cut hair, or a stylist. Convenience store. I had a client just call me the other day. This is what he wants to do, and In order to sell beer, he needs to get a permit from the TABC. He also plans on selling gas. He has to get a license by the Petroleum Storage Tank Registration, or the Texas Natural Resource Conservation Commission. So how many people have heard of that place? Yeah, right? A lot of things that you use every day that also need to be licensed from the state of Texas, like electricians and plumbers. Air conditioning and refrigeration needs to have a license. So, can anybody think of any others?
I just found out that if you're in property development,
Mm-hmm.
and you sell more than 5 properties a year, you have to have a mortgage broker, mortgage originator license.
So if you sell more than 5 properties a year, you have to have a mortgage originator license.
You post a bond.
Wow, post a bond.
It's part of the laws to protect the development of colonials.
Just to give y'all a little, one thing I read one time was in the state of Hawaii, a lot of people that sell their houses in Hawaii become registered real estate agents because it's cheaper for them to get their own commission from selling their own house in Hawaii than it is for them to pay somebody else to sell their house. And that's another one that we haven't talked about. The realtors have to have a license to sell property. So next we're going to talk about zoning, and these are some of the courthouses, here in the valley that we talked about. It's real important that you know that you need to call them, and just call them and ask them. And basically the question is what can I do, or what can I do? Are there any laws or restrictions that say I can't do this? One of the things like construction, you need to get permits to do that. And we talk about it's like where do they dump their debris, things like that. You have to have a special permit for that. Another place that you can get this information is from the city halls. Just call them and ask them. I'm sure they're more than willing to give you the information that you need on what permits and what zoning is required in that city. Taxes. Basically state, local, and federal taxes. When it comes to state and federal, I know that you need to talk to the Texas Comptroller's of Public Accounts Office, and they can tell you what you need to pay. And it really depends on how much money that you do make a month, whether you pay quarterly or monthly. But they're more likely to tell you, they can tell you that a lot more than I can, a lot better. For the federal tax ID, it's real important that you get a federal tax ID because this is basically the Social Security number for the business. And it's real easy to get a federal tax ID. It's also the employer tax number or employer identification number. And I tell people it's real easy because you can actually go to irs.gov and you can get one probably within 5-10 minutes. So you just need to go to their website, fill out the form, and they issue it to you, and then you can use it. So, all right, these are other agencies that you need to be concerned with. When you want to start up a business, is OSHA, which stands for Occupational and Safety Health Administration. OSHA, it's better that you do read up and do some research on it. I know a little bit about it, but I don't want you to take what I say word for word as the truth, because I could be wrong. But usually an OSHA person cannot come into your business without a warrant. But it takes a phone call from them to get a warrant. And if you say you can't come in, then they've got even a bigger probable cause to call and get a warrant. So most people just invite them in. And I've heard fines anywhere from a few $100s to a few $1,000s. So, but that, you know, you're talking about your workers' safety here, so you don't want to be negligent on that. Another place that you need to bone up on is the workman's compensation, workers' compensation. And basically, if you have employees, everybody pays this. And there are some tax breaks, and we'll get into more of that later. The Internal Revenue Service, we've talked a little bit about it. I'm sure you've all dealt with them before. Everybody knows who the IRS is, so they know who everybody else is. And lastly is the U.S. Office of Patents and Trademarks. And like I said, Carlos talked a little bit about inventors, and you want to get your work patented. I will tell you this, patent costs around $10,000, and that's for kind of like a basic patent. I had a doctor I talked to about a month ago, and he had a device, and he was like, wow, they told him he needed $15,000 to patent his device. And he was like, well, I don't have $15,000. And I was like, well, yeah, that's the normal cost, so get used to it. Other sources of information, and these are good sources to look at, you know, and get information from and things like that. And most of it is free. SBDC Net, the sbdcnet.org. Carlos talked a little bit about it, what they're really good at is helping startup businesses. The SBA.gov, the Small Business Administration, has a lot of good information on their website. The governor's office has a lot of good information, and the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts for the state of Texas also has a lot of good information that you can use. Additional sources is entrepreneur.com. I went on this website earlier today. It's got a lot of good information that you can use. bizstats.com. It talks about the different ratios for the different industries that you're looking at. And when I looked at this information, a lot of it was free. So this will help you a lot on your research. And I'm a big advocate for research. You know, to me, it's like one of the things that you can do, and it really doesn't cost you anything. But the more you know, the more that you can do. Another place to get good ideas is Inc.com. The Inc. magazine has a lot about management and entrepreneurship. And this one does cost money, I saw. Zapdata.com, which is now a part of Hoover's. And basically, it's a sales and marketing solution. It's kind of like a lead generator. Now, they do charge for that. I did see that this morning. So, and of course, one of the best places I think you can get information is from the Veterans Business Outreach Center. Talk to either myself or Carlos. Get the information from us. It's free. We're confidential. It makes a lot of sense to come talk to us and just get the information that you ask us the questions that you want to know, and let us help you succeed in business. So just in summary, it's real important to choose the right legal formation for your business. I gave you all some resources. Determine what licenses and permits your business may need. We identified some of the resources that are available to you in this process. And a lot of this information is free, so it doesn't cost you anything. So is there any questions? Okay, thank you all very much.
All righty, we're back here for Module 3. In this module, we're going to talk about business planning and market feasibility, a little bit about the business plan, reasons why small businesses fail. We're going to follow up on that a little bit. The importance of planning, the importance of actually doing a business plan, and how to develop your business plan and resources for help. So I'm sure we've all heard this before. Entrepreneurs don't plan to fail. They just fail to plan. I've never talked with an entrepreneur that's told me, I want to get started so I can close down in about 2 years. That's never the case. It kind of reminds me of that Chopped. Does anybody watch Chopped? That show about cooking? I love that show. Anyway, it's a cooking show. And every time they're doing interviews with these guys, they always say the same thing. I came here to win. Well, of course you came to win. You didn't come to lose. It's a competition. They gotta mix it up a little bit. But so the gist of it is, obviously everybody here wants to be successful. So we're gonna try to go through these things that'll. Some of these are techniques. Some of them are resources. We have templates. But basically, we're gonna go through and show you how to put yourself in a position where your probabilities increase. Obviously, there's no silver bullet. Why do businesses fail? As I mentioned before, inadequate front-end planning, insufficient capital. These are some of the things we've talked about in a previous presentation. One of the things that has been mentioned at a couple of the conferences that I've been to recently is, do you need a business plan? Yes or no? Should I have a business plan or not? And usually somebody brings up the outlier example of people that are successful without business plan. Apple didn't have a business plan, and obviously they're a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's examples of other companies out there that have no business plan. They just go and talk to investors, give them a little one-sheet synopsis, and they hand them over $200,000 or something like that. But I think maybe if we were talking about this in the 80s, that would be more probable, because back then it was easier to get funding and things like that. But now, just the nature of lending and the nature of investment is that you have to be able to show somebody what your strategy is going to be for executing that plan. And more important than a lot of people actually recognize is the management team that you have in place able to execute that plan. In a lot of cases, several lenders and investor presentations that I've been through have highlighted the point that investors in particular are more willing to invest in a okay plan with a great management team than a great plan with a mediocre management team. So that speaks to the fact that it's very important who you have involved with your team. If you don't have the right people in the right positions, then this is the time to start thinking about, how am I going to get that guy that's going to be my finance guy, or going to be my CFO, who's going to be in charge of technology. For a lot of us, it's going to be more like, who's going to be in charge of accounting and payroll. If not me, who's going to do it? That's one of the times I actually recommend. A lot of times, if you're starting real small, it's probably best to look into a staffing company. Do you really want to deal with HR issues right when you're starting? Most people don't. You don't want to have to study about HR regulations and how the trends are in that industry. Maybe something new has just come up. You could miss something, and then you could put yourself in a position where you're liable for some HR compliance infraction or something like that. It's a very precarious situation. So why do you want to prepare it? It's to define and focus your objectives and use appropriate information. One of the other things I mentioned to people, in addition to the justification, internal understanding and external justification, is that you want to know what your strategy is as you move from stage to stage. So you keep that in mind. It's an essential part of the loan process. For a lot of us, the notion of whether we're going to write one or not is kind of a moot point, because you need one if you're going to apply for an actual loan from a bank or a lending institution. Right now, there's a lot of non-bank lending agencies that are becoming more ubiquitous. There's a couple that we worked with in the past, and some of them are good, some of them are not so good. A couple of the real good ones that we've worked with recently is, there's one out of Austin called People Fund. There's one that got started in Texas, and now it's expanded to Oklahoma, Louisiana, and New Mexico. That one's called Acción Texas. That's a homegrown Texas. They're called non-bank lenders. But if you're whether you go to those or a regional lender or a national lender, you're going to need one because they're required. Additionally, it can uncover omissions and or weaknesses. One of the biggest things that we do with clients, if you come in and you already have one, is a gap analysis. So we'll read through it. Myself, our business advisors, sometimes we work with the SBDC folks too, and we're gonna pick that thing apart and tell you what we see missing. One of the things that I find I do, at least in those early stages, is read through them and just see what I know should be in there that's not in there. One of the ways to get around that, not really get around it, but speak to it, I guess, is to do a SWOT analysis. And if y'all want to look that up, there's some great information online on it. I'm not going to get into it right now. We're going to talk about it more in one of the future presentations. But basically, a SWOT analysis is looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats within the industry. Strengths and weaknesses are internal. Strengths and opportunities are internal. Threats and strengths and weaknesses are external. So some of them are looking at what you have internally and how you can leverage the strengths that you have and the opportunities, and on the opposite end, looking at what's going on in the industry and on the outside world and looking how you can mitigate the risks of those things that are going on outside. So one of the ways that I've seen clients kind of try to backdoor that process is just not to address it. So let's say you want to go and build, not even build. Let's say you want to start an outlet that sells shoes, and you have a great product plan. You know what kind of shoes you want. You're speaking to a specific demographic, and if I say, "Who's your competition?" You just say, "Nobody's my competition." Well, I don't have any competition. For number one, there's no such thing as no competition. And for number two, no competition is bad. People think no competition is good. No competition is horrible. It means that nobody wants anything like what you want. If they did want it, somebody else would be selling it to them and they would be buying it right now. Even if it's not exactly what you can provide to them, because that speaks to the differentiation point. But that's one of the things lenders really hate to hear too. If you get in a conversation, well, who's your competition? We have no competition. That's horrible. They're going to say, this guy, he doesn't know really what he's talking about. There's always competition. If there is no direct competition, what there always is competition of substitutes. And that substitute, even if there isn't a direct substitute, is called non-consumption. And non-consumption is typically one of the biggest hurdles you have to get over if you have minimal direct competition. And non-consumption means that if you start a shoe shop, a shoe outlet right there, and nobody in that area really ever buys their shoes from there, then your direct threat of competition is non-consumption. They are not buying shoes in that area. Maybe you're in a little city right next to San Marcos and those outlets are just beating you up. That's a non-consumption issue, because why would they buy your shoes when they can go and buy shoes at the outlets and they have that great selection and they got a Bass shop there and they got all those cool loafers. I mean, those are things that you have to look into in terms of what's going on that I need to know about, because I need to figure out a strategy to move past those issues. And a lot of times it's about competition, and maybe it could be about regulation. Is there a regulation that's going to come up next year that you really haven't addressed? That's one of the reasons you have to do some research to find out. Is that regulation or legislation that's going to pop up, is it going to be good for business or bad for business? It could go either way. And that's one of the things you need to look into. It's not always a bad thing. Is the economy getting worse or is it getting better? Somebody might say, economy's horrible right now. I can't get into business at all. That's not necessarily true. If you were opening something like a Dollar General and the economy's horrible, that is great news for you, because that means more people need to buy things that cost $1. So just because the economy's bad doesn't mean necessarily that you're not going to do well. It depends on your particular industry. The business plan, your basic goals, outline the nature and context of your business opportunity, present the approach. It's about developing strategy. You're going to talk about your pricing strategy, what your cost structure looks like, what your staffing plan looks like, scaled over time. So sometimes, we can look at what your ideal situation is, and that's a good place to start. And that's where I see a lot of my clients in particular start. When they bring me, maybe if they have a financial projection as a business plan already kind of started, the financials will be laid out in a way that'll reflect what they think things are going to look like ideally. It's like the blue sky image of what they think things would look like. And that's a good place to start because it's at least a baseline. But that's not what your financials are going to end up looking like because nobody starts at that blue sky, place in the sky. Nobody starts where your optimal sales are going to be. So if you have it projected at, well, I'm going to be making $30,000 a month, costs are going to be 10, I'm going to be pulling in 20 every month on top of whatever expenses I have. That may be what's going to happen in year 3. But what a lender really is concerned with and what you should concern yourself with is how it's going to play out in the first year when you're ramping up. In those months where your expenses are heavily leaning towards marketing expenses because nobody knows who you are. Let's go back to the shoe shop. Maybe you do have the best shoes and maybe you're selling boots and everybody in that community is a farmer. And as soon as they find out who you are, you're going to sell those boots. They're great boots. But still, it's month 1. Your financials can't say, hey, guess what? I'm going to be making $10,000 my first month. It's unrealistic. So you got to ramp up. You got to take into consideration 2 things when you build financial projections. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, and we're going to talk about this in more detail later. But you take into consideration 2 things: the ramp up period and the ebbs and flows of seasonality. And then you got to marry those 2 when you build year 1 and year 2. And these are all, you create these plans with the notion that all other things being equal. Does everybody remember that from math? Remember back when we were in math and they putting letters and numbers all together and you're in algebra and they say, well, we just want you to solve for X, but just all else being equal, solve for X. So that's kind of the methodology we apply when you look at financial projections because obviously any number of things can happen, once you get into actual operations. So ID the factors that will determine your success, and we're going to talk about marketing tools for raising financing capital and getting commitment. The business plan audience is going to include these 2 categories, the insiders and the outsiders. You have to address both because something you show to a potential employee and something you show to a potential supplier, vendor, is going to be different than the full-fledged business plan that you would show to a bank or an investor. So let's say you have a plan that you want to present to a vendor. That's going to be kind of a pared down version of what you want to do. And you're really just going to show him, this is what just as an example, if you have a vendor you're trying to vet, you're trying to figure out what his capacity is to supply you with the amounts that you need right now and what his cap capacities are to supply you. Let's just say that some disaster happened. If you need 85% from one vendor or 15%, so you're going to say to the 15% one, I need 15% of these T-shirts from you right now. Can you do that? And he'd say, sure, I can do that. Well, this is what I might need 6 months from now. Can you still do that? And those are the type of things that you're going to vet. But now you're only talking about sales and operations, so that little plan is small. Those are insiders. Those are the people that you're going to deal with and suppliers and things like that. They're also going to you're going to create a plan, the big one, the full-fledged one, for outsiders, investors, mentors. When you come to talk to us about it, you're going to bring us a plan. We're going to talk about. We're going to tear it up. We're going to red ink it. I don't like to use red ink though because it's people get bad images about the red ink. So I just write and then I highlight it in yellow. It makes people feel better. And then customers and suppliers, in some sense, they're considered outsiders too. But in a lot of ways, like I said, at the early stages, those guys are really part of your team. If you're starting out and you don't have any operational experience, you're dependent on those guys. That's another reason you don't want to have only one supplier. I don't know if everybody remembers, like 5 years ago, they had a situation with the earthquake in Japan. And, because of that earthquake, nobody could really get any electronics replacement parts for a lot of the things that are made in Japan. I mean, everything's made in Japan. Components to vehicles, components to DVD players and stuff like that. So then there became like a lead time of about 3 months after that disaster, right? What was it? Tsunami, the tsunami. And, a lot of these companies recognize the importance of having a supplier diversity base, but they would have 2 suppliers or 3 suppliers, but guess where all of them were? Japan. So it led to some changes in across industries after that disaster. So BP is going to answer these. This is a slide we've shown before. How much money will it take and how much profit are you going to make? And these are the sections of the business plan for those of you who don't know. Now, this is the way that they're outlined when you write the business plan, but introduction is written last. Sometimes I get business plans and the introduction is already. You shouldn't even know what the introduction is until you're going to hand that to somebody. You don't even worry about that right now. The main important one is the financial analysis, and the hardest one to come up with is this one doesn't have a little pointer, is the market analysis. So keep those things in mind as we're moving through them. The most important is the financial information, and the hardest to do is figuring out what's going on in the market. If you recognize that early on, you can kind of internalize that it's going to take way more time to get a hold of what's going on in the market, because it really is. That's going to be where the most of your research time is going to be dedicated. Give me a sec here. And as I mentioned, the management plan has to do with who's going to fill the key roles that you've identified. Sometimes, let's say that there's 6 or 7 key roles that you've identified. You're still going to, like I said about that Staples commercial, you're going to be doing 3 or 4. But who's going to do those other 3? Somebody's going to have to do them, and you're going to outline it and talk a little bit about their resume in the business plan. There's going to be a spot for that. You're going to give a little bio on them. Hey, this guy's been doing this, been in the industry 20 years. He has experience doing this, this, and this is what his role is going to be. The introduction, we're just going to skip this because, like I said, this is the stuff that you're going to worry about at the very end. Who are we? A little bit about the SWOT. So it's an overview of everything you're going to talk about. You know, when you give a presentation in English class when we're in high school, they say, tell me what you're going to say it, and then tell me what you just said. That's kind of the way the business plans work out. So this is when you're telling them what you're going to say, and then you get into actually saying it. So the actual telling of it is talking about the products and services. You have to actually describe the product and services the company will make and provide a summary of the product line. Now, a lot of times, you know, this is much more involved than people start out with, and there's nothing wrong with coming and starting with a baseline of this is what I want to do. But let's go back to the shoe example. I want to open a shoe store. Okay, great. What are you going to sell? I'm going to sell shoes. What kind of shoes are you going to sell? I'm going to sell, let's go with the boots. I'm going to sell boots. What kind of boots? Are they going to be construction worker boots? Or are they going to be boots for somebody that's working in the field? What brand are you going to concentrate on? Why are you concentrating on that brand? These are questions that you're going to speak to in there. Well, I'm buying Tony Lama boots because those are the highest quality boots. They cost $400, but people in this area have discretionary income of whatever the amount of discretionary income is. And you're telling a story. You're telling a story. This is why I'm selling this. That's the one line. And then I would say, are you only selling boots? Is that the only product you're going to sell? Most people have at least 3 or 4 product lines. So in a boot shop, you might have boot accessories, and then you're going to have socks, specific special socks. Later on, after you start doing this analysis, you're going to find out probably, and what a lot of, at least in the retail world, I did some work in the retail world before I started this with Target. You're going to find out margins are probably higher in certain things than in other things. You might get 50% margins on the socks, and you're only getting 10% margins on the boots. So what does that mean in reality? What does it mean about your sales approach? Well, it means when you hire people, or if you're going to be the one doing it, you're going to want to sell that. Every time you sell a pair of boots, you want to sell the socks and the accessories. Because you're not making much off the boot, but you're making good money off of the other stuff. You know, fast food restaurants do this to us all the time without us even knowing. They're not really making any money off that burger, but they make a lot of money off the Coke. You see that Coke costs you $1.79. The Coke is where they make the money. The burger, they're losing all that money. The burger really costs $2.50 to make that burger. The Coke, that Coke is costing them 6 cents, and they're selling it to you for $1.79. If you don't get the combo, the owners, they're like, these guys are killing me. They're not buying combos. I'm not making any money. So that's how to get them on the back end. Just as they're probably not going to like me for that, but that's where you make your money from. It's sometimes it's something other than what you think it is. You know, there's the same thing that's been said about McDonald's for a long time. What kind of company is McDonald's? Some people would say McDonald's is a restaurant. Well, technically McDonald's is a restaurant, but really McDonald's is a real estate and toy company, because they're about finding real estate in the best place and selling toys to little kids so their parents pay too much for combos, and then that's how they make their money. So are they really a restaurant? Not really. I mean, they've leveraged other other parts of their business model to make you think that that's what they're doing. But they're really, I mean, if they could just sell the toy to you, they'd just sell the toy, but you have to feed the kids something while they're there, right? So provide a summary and really get in as in depth as you can. A lot of times I tell clients, for number one, there's two types of assistance that you're going to receive as you follow this path of working with people to help you with your business plan. And those two types are counselors and no, what should I say? Not necessarily. It's a terminology thing. You can either say, we're getting advisement from somebody that we pay to do this type of thing, or we're getting counseling. If you're paying somebody to do it, then you expect them to write the plan for you. And people I've talked to all the time, they say, well, we paid this company and they wrote the business plan for me and I paid them $500 or $5,000. I've heard both. Or you can work with somebody like me or somebody at the SBDC who's going to walk you through how to do it, but we're not going to do it for you. It doesn't do you any good for us to do it for you, and it doesn't do me any good to write it for you. If you have to explain the business plan, how is me writing it helping you do anything? I can give it to you, you're not going to understand it. I can write it for you, then I still have to explain it to you. It doesn't do anybody any good. So as you move forward with these things, keep in mind, you're going to be writing the whole plan. So when I give it to you initially, your business plan template, and I say, fill this thing in, and you start looking at it and say, man, this is a lot of stuff. These are all this subject. I always give a disclaimer there, and I say, fill it in as much as you can, and then we're going to go through it. But this part right here, get into as much detail as you possibly can. The more you have, the better, and then we can part back later on if we have to. You know, when on the coffee shop ones especially, the people that do the best in restaurants and like coffee shops and bars, I've found just from the experience that I've had working with clients, are people that have like a little bit ADD, just a little bit, because they are very technically driven, and they'll get into every single line item, every single product, and that's what you need to do. How much does it cost? How much am I getting it for based on the economies of scale? And how much am I selling it for? And how many do I expect to sell? And then you add all those things up on a month-to-month basis, and that's how you figure out how much you're going to make. But if you're not willing to line item out everything that you're going to do, everything that you're going to buy, then we're really not even able to create like even semi-accurate financial projections, because we don't really know. You're just kind of throwing stuff out there. Well, maybe I'll sell a sock or two. I don't really know. I mean, who knows? Maybe if I get a good deal on socks. I mean, that's not a way. You can't approach it like that. Your manufacturing and operations plan. This is where you talk about the physical location. Are you going to rent? Are you going to lease? I always recommend everybody don't buy. You can't buy as a startup. It's just unfeasible. And a couple of times, this is another thing that, like, if you build a plan and you have in your plan as a startup that you're going to buy a location, a physical location. It's like a red light usually for a lender. They'll say you haven't put enough effort into thinking this through because you don't have enough money to build, and there's no reason to build. We have excess supply of locations where you can rent. If we were in a different economic situation and the demand did not meet supply, where all of these rental locations were taken up, and in that case you say, well, I have to build. I mean, there's no locations. I can't do anything. But right now, we're in a down economy. There's locations everywhere. They're popping up. Places are opening and closing. It's a function of the economy. You can find a place. You can always find a place. How does the location affect your business? This is something that we speak to with the research. We do what's called a ring analysis. So we can tell you what's going on, demographics within a region of 1, 3, and 5 mile radius, what the discretionary income is, what the average income is, average age, average number of kids for a household, things like that, all those type of things. Also on the pass-through rates on particular streets. So if you want to put something on a corner of 10th and Dove or something like that, we can tell you, well, this is the number of cars that go through that area every day. Then that also shows competition in that area. So if you wanted to open what was it? It was a home. I had one recently. There was a home cleaning service. It was in Houston. And we did a ring analysis on hers, and those actually do pop up in little red dots. So if there's a bunch of them, that's like the whole screen is red. You're going to see them everywhere. And it just so happens that home cleaning services in Houston, they're everywhere. But for any of you that know what Houston's like, Houston is really fragmented. You know, there's Spring, there's Stafford, there's Main Houston where the gallery is. There's all these little towns, and if people that live in those little cities, they don't really like to go to those other cities for stuff. You just go to your little city, and you weren't really going to go anywhere else. So the goal is to find a place where there's not too many of them, and then you want to be in that kind of area. So anyway, the reason I'm mentioning this is if you don't have a lot of traffic going through your area, and it doesn't support putting something there, it doesn't matter how cheap your rent is, even if they're giving it to you, it's not maybe probably a good idea to put it there. Sometimes cities will try to entice people to move to their cities and say, well, we'll give you tax abatements, or we'll even help you get a loan. You know, there's a loan program called a 504 loan program right now. It's a very popular loan program whereby an EDC puts in 40%, the client puts in 10%, and the SBA puts in 50%. The lender puts in 50%, backed by SBA, excuse me. And that's a popular loan program, and it's meant to bolster economic development in particular regions. The reason they do that is because they're trying to bring a particular portfolio of businesses to a city. But even in those cases, if you're looking at an area and it's not feasible for you to be making revenue in that area, then you still wouldn't do it. I mean, you have to look at those type of things. That's a 504 loan. Lastly, this is even more important these days, proximity to supplies of raw materials or suppliers in general. Now more than ever, we have to consider the cost of logistics. It's just enormous now. You know, look at the heyday of the 80s when gas was $1.79. It's just beautiful times. You know, nobody cared about it, and that was the heyday also of outsourcing. That was when outsourcing started because it didn't cost anything to ship anything from one place to another. Everybody loved it. Big corporations loved it, and they leveraged it as much as they could. But now, the people, even big corporations, recognize the lessening of the value, I guess, the lowering of the value of outsourcing, because you still, especially in the product industries, because if you haven't made in China, you still have to get it back over here, and it's not cheap to ship things as it used to be. So it's something to consider. I can tell you, I own a business, and I'm starting a product business right now, and it's just barely on the ground floor. And I've had some businesses that closed down, so I fall into that other category too. Well, that didn't work. Throw that away. Throw that one away too. But you know, I can tell you right now from the product one that I'm doing, a lot of times you'll get a good price. I'll tell you I'll get a good price. I'm just going to give you some baseline numbers. This product, for the amount you requested, it's going to be $100 for the amount you. I'm thinking that's awesome. So send me your invoice, and I'll go ahead and pay you for that. You get the invoice, product $100, shipping and handling $200. So if you have to build those things in, or you're not going to know how much the stuff's really going to cost you. And if you look at that, that's about average, I think, and in a lot of ways, you're going to look at either doubling or tripling what the cost is for shipping. And it's another reason you really have to look at all the elements from getting the product from the raw material stage, if you have any part in the payment of what that costs, to getting it into the customer's hands. So if you have a web-based business and you're going to apply like an e-commerce template to something, you have to consider it on the front end as well as the back end, because now you're probably going to be shipping stuff to them. So you might be able to do international freight or something to get it to you, but then you're going to have to do UPS, FedEx shipping to get it to them. And you have to include that. The benefit of that is a lot of times you can pass that cost on to them, but then you have to know from the potential client, are you willing to pay that extra $10 for shipping? I mean, if the shoes are $50, or do you want to pay an extra 10 or 15 for shipping? And people might say, no, forget that. I'll just go to the outlet then. It's just not even worth it. Questions so far on that? Kind of skipped. Wait a minute. Okay, this is a lead into the other thing. Inventory, storage, and equipment, merchandise display, expansion potential. You know, these are all considerations. And you guys are going to get this slide deck, so I'm not going to spill a lot of time on that because I'm not sure if everybody here is, going to go into manufacturing and need to build these type of facilities or anything like that. So we're not going to talk about that. Availability of labor is one of the most important ones. Does your region have the capacity to support the labor needs that you require? And this is something that you would find out by looking at general statistics, census statistics. And this stuff is It's readily available. You can go online and look at the Department of Census right now and pull up anything for the city of McAllen, the city of Edinburgh, and it'll tell you what the basic demographics are here. And that'll lead you to some conclusions. What training is required? You know, if it's the coffee shop example, you're going to have to get some training as a barista, and then maybe later on you're going to have to send your folks for training. How much is that going to cost you to get them trained? And what is your expected turnover? In some industry, turnover is high. In some industries, it's low. What are the things that are going to lead to low turnover for your business if you're in an industry with high turnover? This is an add-on to having an answer to every single question. You know, you're not going to, in the actual plan, some of these questions don't need to be addressed because of the particular industry that you're in. But if you recognize that question needs to be addressed, then you need to have a plan for how you are going to address it. And that could be anything. It could be a one sentence, hey, this is how I'm going to address it, or it could be a more drawn out, this is what we view as the challenge with this particular issue, and this is how we're going to address it. Okay, so the market analysis is going to give you information about industry trends. As I mentioned, this is secondary research, so we'll pull the research for you. Usually happens right at the beginning stages. If you want to come in and you know what industry you're trying to look into, we can help you pull it. It takes a couple of weeks for us anyway. It takes a couple of weeks for it to get in. After it gets in, I send it to you, I tell you to review it, and then we sit down and go over it. These reports can be anything from 5 pages to 30 pages I've seen in them. And it can be a little overwhelming because you think to yourself when you first look at them, do I need all of this information? Usually the answer is no, you do not need all that information. We go through it and we figure out what the high points are. What's going on? What are the growth trends in that industry? What's the actual dollar amount? If you're looking at, the home furnishings, I'm just remembering that one because it's one of the ones I just looked up. If you're looking at the home furnishings market, how much is that market totally worth? Well, I think I remember $30.2 billion globally. But well, how much is it worth here in the United States? What's going on here that makes it's making sales higher or lower from last year? And those are the things that are going to lead you to better conclusions as you're building a strategy for your local market. So these are the questions you're going to have to ask yourself. That's another reason I recommend you're going to want to refer back to this actual presentation later on, because you're going to actually answer these questions in the plan, in your business plan as you move through it. What's the size of the market? What percentage of the market do you anticipate getting? One of the mistakes that sometimes people make is they say, I'm going to penetrate the market and I'm going to get 1% of the market. Well, that's just a little bit too broad. Also, it's important to recognize that within markets, there's segments and then there's subsegments. One of the best examples for that is the grocery market. Within the grocery market, there's individual product segment markets. So within the grocery market, the broad grocery market, there's soft drinks segment. And within soft drinks, there's energy drinks. So if you're looking at the markets and you're saying, I'm gonna get 1%, and you're saying that about the wrong market, then you're going to have very, very skewed numbers. One of the ways to kind of give you a baseline for this is to look at the RMA statistical analysis that comes out about every 5 years. And we can pull reports for that, and they give you ratios, averages for industries. This is probably the most important undertaking you can do while you're looking at an analysis of are your financial projections feasible? And this is feasible. It gives you, the beauty of the RMA ratio analysis is they give you a mid, a high, and a low. And if you're creating financial projections and you're anything above in between mid and low, it's unreasonable in my opinion. And in the opinion of most lenders too, because it's just, how can you proclaim that you're going to come in at the high level of ratios within an entire industry and nobody's ever bought one boot from you, not even one, and you say, I'm going to come in, I'm going to tear it up. It's going to be amazing. And this is on average. I mean, this is, obviously there's outliers, obviously. Like, you got the Apple outlier, but let's be honest, how many apples are there? There's one. That's why everybody knows what Apple is. I mean, there's only one. That's why they call them outliers. For everybody else, you gotta kind of build your plan according to these guidelines. So that's another thing we can do as we're looking at what your ratios are. What's your quick ratio? What's your current ratio? Your current assets to your current liabilities. What's your total assets to total liabilities? What's your debt servicing ratio? I mean, are these things in close to parameters of what is going on in the industry? And what they'd like to see is you're right around in what's going on with the low, or even a little bit below the low. If you're in the mid or the high, it's just unreasonable. Now, there's about 6 or 7 ratios that we're going to look at, main ones. And if there's one in particular that's out of the ranges, maybe 1 or 2, then you can explain away 1 or 2. But you still have to explain it, which means you have to look into the ratios. You have to kind of figure out, well, why is this one, the industry's over here, why am I higher on this one? And it might be something like, well, this loan has something to do with it, and, well, we had to purchase an inventory that we're not going to be able to sell for 6 months. I've dealt with a client like that recently. Maybe you got to put all that money into it, but you can't even start selling until 6 months because you had to special order equipment. So you have to be able to explain at least what's going on. It's not an automatic, hey, this is just not going to work. It's a no-go. But it's a situation whereby you look at those ratios and you explain why some of them are out of parameters. If all of them are out of parameters, you throw the whole plan out. You start over. It's just you're not even close. We just got to scrap it and look at this all over again because we got to get somewhere close to around those ranges.
These analyses, are they just like a canned report that someone's developed with the intent of providing the information someone would need to know? That's a great question. It is a canned report. It's not. The reports are not created necessarily to help you develop a business plan. That's just what we're going to utilize them for. They're developed to give economists an idea of what's going on within industries. So they depend on data aggregation from a lot of government agencies and from data received directly from private and public companies. Most of the data comes from public companies, though, because a lot of the times private companies do not divulge very much anyway of their financial information. Some of them do, like what do you call it? Willingly, but not very many of them. Great question. So you're going to discuss the growth potential in the market. You're going to really dig into why you think your particular strategy for your product or service is going to be successful in your area, in your region, online, because nobody's selling boots with a Texas flag on the top of it or something like that, and everybody wants them because you're going to sell them at the Houston Texans games, and you're going to go walking around the tailgate, whatever it is. That's a good idea, actually. Y'all can't steal that. I'm going to do that one myself. So you're going to discuss the economic, social, and demographic issues too. What's the state of affairs in the macro environment? The macro is just like what's going on in the world right now, and how do you think that's going to impact your ability? Jose Pena, how is that going to affect Jose Pena's ability to do what he wants to do? And if you see anything in there that looks like a challenge, you want to address it. You want to address it because it lets a lender know this guy's really put some thought into it. He knows what's going on out there. He knows if this happens, he's going to address it. And you also want to do it just for purposes of internal understanding. Some people, I've had a lot of pushback. They say, what if you don't need any money? What if you don't have a lender? What if they already told you they're going to give you the money? Why do I need to address all these things? Well, the main reason, in my opinion, is you really want to understand. I mean, do you really want to move forward if you don't understand these macro issues and how they relate to the micro environment? I mean, that's the main important thing, in my opinion. So after you look at the market analysis, then you're going to start with your actual activity time. I guess you would call it your get into the function of actually looking at targeting and segmentation. How are you going to attract and keep the key market? This also has to do with, after you look at all these reports, after you look at industry data, macro environment, what's going on locally, you have to decide what your target market is going to be. There can only be one, like Highlander. There can only be one. You can't penetrate initially. I mean, later on, you can have growth markets, but that's why they're called growth markets. You're going to move from a penetration market into a growth market. It's, and like I said, these are not steadfast things. Somebody will watch this and say, later on, because this is a recorded version, somebody's going to say, Carlos, that's not true. I had a 3-pronged strategy, and I penetrated 3 markets at the same time, and it worked great, and now I'm rich. And I'm sure that's true in some cases, but I think those serve as examples of outliers. Like I said, those are not what you would typically expect. What you would typically expect is that you need to pick one because it requires focus. And you need to come up with a strategy for how you're going to, why that's the one. So you're gonna write like a little synopsis. Why is this the one? Why are the Tony Lama shoes being sold to Mexican nationals in this region? Why is that the best plan? Why have you come to that to that strategy? Why have you come upon it? So after you talk about the why, then you're going to talk about the how. How are you going to keep them? Now, that does not mean that in many cases, and I'm sure there's in many of the cases that I've seen, that you're always going to be right. You might not be right. You might be wrong about that first penetration market, but that's one of the things that you're going to reference your survey and your interview data for, because you're going to want to be able to say, look, I didn't make this up. It's kind of like the baby story, the baby picture. If you're showing everybody that picture of the baby and you're saying, look at that baby's good looking, it's still your opinion, and they're looking at you like you're biased. But if you have a picture of your baby in the newspaper and it has a little sash on it and it says winner of the Edinburgh Baby Beauty Contest, now you can say, look, that's a beautiful baby. They said it is. I don't even think he's a good looking baby, but they said all these people said he's good looking, so we're going to take him to the next competition. So really what you're saying is, this isn't even my information. You want to kind of detract yourself from the plan in that sense and be able to say, this is not even you kind of approaching it in a sense where you're presented it as though it's not even my plan. It's all these smart people and people that are potential clients saying, this is what we want, and the research saying, this is why they want it. And all I'm going to do, all I am is the executioner. I'm going to execute this plan because I think it's going to make me the money. It's not, but it wasn't all, none of this information is coming from me. I'm just aggregating and showing you why this is going to work. So you got to start out with documentation of demand for market or service, if relevant, that says, but I always think it's very relevant. If you're, this is where I'm going to get in a little bit of a baseline of a presentation that I do that's actually a whole other 3-hour presentation on market validation. But you need to consider this a lead into the value of doing those surveys. And what I tell people to utilize as a baseline is 100 people. You need to get 100 people surveyed in some fashion or another and get actual feedback. Now, if I go up to, what's your name, please? If I go up to Renee and I say, hey, Renee, I have some questions for you about these boots, and he goes, I don't want to talk to you, I'm going to get out of my face, then he doesn't count. Then he doesn't count as one of the 100. It has to be somebody that actually answers the questions. And even if he doesn't want them, that's a great survey. If he's like, no, I hate Tony Lama boots. I only wear Red Wings because they're comfortable and they don't make my toes hurt. Then he's great because he's telling you why he doesn't want it. He counts, but he answered the questions. They don't have to be positive. They don't have to be, and it's even better if they're negative because then you can take that and incorporate it into what you're doing. But he has to have said something. So, and I've had pushback on that too. People say, well, I mean, why do I need 100? It's a lot. That's a lot of feedback right there. Well, do you think you can survive, or do you think your business can survive a year with less than 100 clients? If you do, and you're selling diamonds, then you don't have to get 100. You can get 10. You can just get 10. If you think you can only sell to 10 people per year, and you'll be fine. But if you are not selling diamonds, I mean, the baseline is 100. 100 respondents to the survey. So these are some things that kind of negate, in a way, the requirement for surveys. If you have 2 signed contracts, I'm not going to ask you to see one single survey. We'll just move right past that. If you're like, I have some contracts, these people say, this is what they want. They've already ordered 50 of them. I just got to figure out how I'm going to get the money to order, make these 50 of them. Then you don't. We're not even going to talk about surveys and what does the general public think, and this is kind of something that moves you beyond that point. Letters of commitment, you need more of them, but that's also something that it serves to bolster the survey. So if you have the surveys and the interviews and these 4, that just makes your plan all the more robust. but it also means maybe you can get less of them. If you have letters of intent and you have signed contracts and you just have a few surveys from other people that say, hey, maybe when you get started, 6 months from now, I'm going to be in a position to buy maybe like 100 boots a quarter from you, that type of thing, then those just help to bolster your plan. But so the real goal is to, if you can get these type of things, but if you can get these type of things, you're in a golden situation. I have a TechCom client right now, and he has one letter of interest. It's not a letter of commitment, and he has no signed contracts. And he's asking for investment capital from angel investors. So if you're at that point, you're a little short. He needs at least one letter of commitment, maybe one letter of commitment, and then an investor will say, well, now we're talking about something different. Because at first, what we're really talking about, if you don't have any of those things, is just an idea. It's a plan, it's an idea, it's kind of insubstantial. Once you got these things, now we're talking about wasted time that we're sitting on money that could be getting made. You see how those two things are different? There's a huge chasm. This is another thing that separates two stages of development. There's a huge chasm between I have a plan and I have an idea, and and then this other side of the scenario where somebody's already handed me money, any amount of money, for something that I've given them, product or service. Even if you've only sold one, unless you sold it to your mom or your sister, because they don't count, because they're going to buy anything from you. Like I already said, you got to quantify those things. If your mom bought 4 of them from you, you got to throw out that. They should really count. So as I mentioned before, you're going to be looking at competition. Who are they? Where are they? As I mentioned before with the example of home cleaning agencies. If a lot of them are on the north side and you recognize that there's an underserved market on the south side, then you just want to get into that a little bit. Well, there's 30 of them up here up north. We're going to kind of benchmark our prices off of them because we're in the same basic region. We're going to pay our employees about the same, but we're going to focus on this target market down here because there's only one down here and it's 6 miles away and we're going to be 1 mile away. So you got to explain why that's a good strategy. How large are they compared to you? Now, this comes into play a lot when you talk about when we get a report that shows the ring analysis, it'll show how much the annual revenue is for the people that are in your competition network. So some of them, we'll use the cleaning agency example again. Some of them are large companies, they have 10 employees, they do annual revenue of maybe $300,000, $400,000 a year. Those competitors are competition in your local region, but they're indirect because maybe you're not concentrating on their particular client base. Maybe they serve a client base that includes commercial real estate, and they do office buildings, and they come in here and do these type of things. You're not going to concentrate on those. Then this is the type of things you would say. Well, we're not. They focus on commercial real estate. We don't really do that. We're focusing on single-family residential homes only in this little community because we feel like they have enough discretionary, those type of things. But you still are going to speak to your differentiation and how you're going to do things a little differently. I do want to add something to clarify that. If you are getting into a market that's commoditized, by which I mean the services are ubiquitous, everybody's doing the same thing, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be successful either. One of the ways to explain why you might be successful if you're in that situation is by showing how the industry is growing in that industry. And that's called the pie is getting bigger, so I don't need to take my piece of pie from somebody else. It's like, if you're sitting at a table with a small pie and you come to the table and you have to take somebody else's piece, that's a lot harder than if you go to a table with a big pie and there's only 2 or 3 people sitting there, you take a little piece, nobody cares. It's a big pie. If they want more of it, they know they can get more of it. You're just taking a little piece. So if you can explain how the industry is growing in that area, you might be able to say, look, we'll go back to the boot example. Look, Carlos, look, investor. It doesn't matter that the outlets are right there. The influx of my demographic, let's just say Mexican nationals, the influx is so huge. The population increases year over year are 13%. That means they're just moving into this area. Everybody's just coming into this area. It doesn't even matter. Well, it matters a little bit, but it's not going to affect me that negatively that this other competitor is right here because this pie is just getting so big. There's enough for me to sell my boots and for them to keep selling their boots and for everybody to be happy. That might be a situation. And if it is, then you just need to explain that's what's going on. Does your competition extend credit? Why are you different? This is the most important thing. Even in those situations where you know it's commoditized, I still recommend to people you have to be able to say the one thing that makes you better. Why am I going to be better at this? Even if there's always a fail-safe that people lean on, that you can lean on to kind of explain why you're going to be better. Well, we're all doing the same thing. It's the same services. Why am I going to be better? I'm going to have better customer service. Okay, great. Tell me about your customer service plan. How are you going to engage the customer? How are you going to get feedback from them and integrate that feedback into changes in your policies that are going to make them happier down the road? See, because anybody can say, I'm going to have better customer service, but what are your operational strategies for making sure that your customer service is better? That's the difference between, you know, a plan and tactics that form strategy. You see what I'm saying? That's the difference between, like, a general says, we're going to attack, and then the captain says, this is how we're going to do it. And then you got a sergeant saying, all right, now this is who's going, and this is where we're going to go, and this is what time, and this is what weapons we're going to take. Those are different stages along the trajectory that they're all very different. Next step is the sales plan and pricing policy, and we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we're going to come back and continue on with this. Let's get a little break here. Okay, we're going to continue on here and talk about a little bit the sales plan. Obviously, that includes considerations of what your pricing policy is, but that's contingent upon, obviously, what your cost structure is. So these things are all lead-ins to the previous foundation that you're going to build upon. And there's a couple of different strategies for pricing that you can use. You can use the value add, cost plus, which means you add a certain percentage on to what your costs are, and that's what you assign your pricing to be. And there's a couple of other ones as well. I highly recommend taking an actual class on pricing. EGBI gives a great one. I'm going to recommend that one to you guys. I'm sure they'd love to hear from y'all. They're out of Austin. I think they have it online now. It should be EGBI. It stands for Economic Growth Business Incubator. And the guy in charge there is named Al Lopez. It's just one of many of their short, hour-long classes on particular subject matter. Along with this consideration, you have to consider what markups and discounts you're going to apply as part of your sales plan. This is kind of misleading in a way because they shouldn't really be counted in the context of the sales plan as much as they should be counted in the financial assessment as part of a marketing strategy. Because you assign costs to what particular initiative you're going to put in place, and then you base an ROI on that cost. So if you have markdowns, in my opinion, in some cases, should be treated just like a newspaper ad campaign, in that you expect a certain amount of traffic or sales or revenue increases from that activity. And then you assign it a cost, you assign it a value, and you assign it what a return on investment. And one of the most straight line ways I can explain that is, if you expect it to cost $1,000, you expect it to produce $2,000. And if it doesn't produce the $2,000, then it wasn't worth the investment that you did. I heard Bill earlier say something about, a promotional campaign that if you're doing something, if something that's a part of your market mix right now is not producing the return on investment that you expected, or it's not producing sufficient return on investment, then you throw that thing away and you start something else. There was a client that we had that did auto repair, and for a little while he was purchasing Google AdWords so that you can come up on the top of the list and things like that. And he found that it just wasn't valuable for him because he's doing auto repairs for a particular old type of vehicles. Who does auto repairs on new vehicles? Nobody, because they don't break down. Old vehicles break down. And people usually go to the auto repair shop in their community. They're not going to run around and look for one. So he threw that out of his marketing mix, and then he decided he was going to do other things to supplement it, such as what he did was he sponsored a Little League team. So, then he gets to put his name on the back of the Little League team. And what are Little League teams? All the kids in Little League teams, parents live in that local community. So then you're getting more exposure in that way. And he found that was more value for the money that he's putting in. So I just wanted to mention that as here, these things play off of other elements. This is part of the sales plan and the sales strategy, but as a cost, it's really a cost of marketing. And marketing is, people sometimes view marketing as, well, it's fluff, or, it's really hard to quantify. And it is in some cases, but you ought to have some plan in place for how you plan to quantify it and how you think you're going to assess it, and at which point you're going to assess whether it's functional or non-functional. And if it's still functional, then you're going to either continue. You can do one of three things. You can continue with that strategy, you can increase spending on that strategy, or you can decrease spending on that strategy, or you can get rid of it totally. But it's going to be one of those. What is the relationship between your price and your image? Sometimes people choose to penetrate a market and they think that they're going to be successful based upon a low price differentiation marketing strategy. We're the low price provider. Come to us. We got the lowest price stuff. That hardly ever works. And I'm going to tell you why it hardly ever works. The bigger guys, the incumbents that are there, in some cases, they can just lower their prices until you go out of business. And in a lot of cases, that's exactly what they'll do because it's the easiest thing to do. They have a big product portfolio, and if you come in and you're selling one or two of their things in their product portfolio, they just don't want to have to deal with you. People will say, well, can you match that price? Sure, I'll go lower than that price. Just keep you coming in and buying all the other stuff that I got. And they don't care if they're losing money on a whole department of items. It doesn't matter to them because they're still making money on all of these other departments. And they'll do it for as long as it takes. If it takes 6 months, they'll do it for 6 months. If it takes 2 years till you're out of business, then it takes 2 years. Now, you might say to yourself, well, that's kind of divisive. Are they waiting for you? Do they do it on purpose those 2 years? Well, some cases, yes, some cases, no. But most of the time, it's much less divisive than that. They're just going to keep lowering their prices as long as you do, and you can't wait them out. They can wait you out. So there has to be something in addition to a low price strategy. Is it a low price plus customer service plus quality assessment? Whatever it is, that can't be the only thing. In the same vein as secondary research can't be the only research, low price strategy can't be your only strategy because there's just too many ways to get around it in most cases. Additionally, with the sales plan, you have to have your distribution channel. As I mentioned earlier, what channels does your competition use? Sometimes you might even be able to use the same channels. Sometimes you can find a channel that is much cheaper and your product costs the same, which means the end-to-end cost of your product is lower now. Even though on the shelf, let's just say it's a shelf item, or on the website, it costs exactly the same thing. Let's say you know something they don't about how shipping distribution is going to be cheaper. Is the product available when the customer wants it? This is one of the things that I've given an example before of what we've all seen. You go to a restaurant when they just open, and there's just waiters everywhere. They're just overflowing with them. They're everywhere. They're waiting on you hand and foot. Well, that guy's burn rate is enormous at that time. But he has to do it because he's just opening up. He has to make sure the customer service is good. But after he realizes, this is what happens with a lot of restaurant closures. After he realizes his staffing expense is too high, then he just cuts everybody, and now he has a skeleton crew. Well, right about the time that happens, everybody that heard the great stuff about the great service from the first little round of people, they're all coming in. And now his restaurant's full, and he's got 2 waiters. So now he's in big trouble. You have to kind of even those things out. Is one available when the other one is being demanded? Describe in detail your channel and your plan to reach the market. Along with this, I always recommend you have to expand on your plan Bs. Who is your secondary channel? Maybe even a tertiary channel. Who's going to provide backup support in case something happens with one of your primary channels? This also applies to vendors and suppliers. You can't just have one. You have to have 2, 3, third tier options. You have to explain kind of how you're going to split sourcing from the primary and the secondary. So I used the example earlier. You might say, look, we have a primary, we have a good relationship. I'm going to get 85% of my product from him, but I'm going to keep that secondary one as a close supplier. I'm not going to get nothing from him because then he's going to be used. We might have an agreement, we might have a contract that whenever I want something, he's going to be available, but he might start building out his capacity because I'm not really buying anything from him. So I'm going to get 15% from him every month, and I might fluctuate it up to 25 during seasonality just to make sure he's there and we have that relationship in case something happens with this first supplier, or maybe the terms are going to change with your first supplier or a channel, a particular channel. Terms change all the time. All the time. Sometimes you're going to be in relationships with a supplier and you might not have an actual contractual relationship. So he can just say, hey, bud, prices are just going to go up about 30% next month. I'll see you then. And then that'll be it. I mean, and your prices are just going up. So you want to have other relationships in place in case that happens. So you can have a viable conversation with him where you can tell him, look, if that's the case, then I'm booking it. I got these guys over here. I'm working with them. And then that's a different conversation than, well, I guess I got to pay that extra 30%. Let's see what we got here. So it also concludes, as a build on to what we were talking about before about promotion, advertising, personal selling, publicity, sales promotions. Sometimes folks get confused. Advertising and marketing. Advertising is not marketing. Advertising is a component of marketing, but marketing is the holistic plan that you've developed that includes the mix of different things that you're going to do to get information out to the public about what your product or service is and what kind of promotions you got going on. Advertising is only the one specific function whereby you're explaining to people what's going on right now, what you're offering. Personal selling is one of those functions as well, but it's not the same thing as advertising. Advertising would be like, well, we're going to pay for money. It's static. It's not interactive most of the time. Maybe you put an ad in the paper. Maybe you do some advertising on a website, magazine, something like that. But they're all very different things. For each business is different. Which ones you're going to do is really up to you, and it's kind of, sometimes it's a hit or miss. A lot of the research that you do with clients initially, that's probably going to be one of the questions that you're going to ask. Hey, where do you find out about boots right now? Where do you go? Where do you look for them? Well, I like to look for them online, and then I go down to the mall and try them on, but I don't buy them from there because they're really expensive. And then I go over here to the store and I buy them over the store. So that's going to lead you to some conclusions about where should I advertise. I mean, there's an archery client I had recently, and he wanted to know where to advertise, but he recognizes his clientele is a specific demographic from South America. So then you have to find out, if your client is from South America and you're selling them a particular service, where are you going to do it where that particular demographic is going to see it the most? And like I said, it's a hit or miss. You're going to find out, at certain milestone points, whether one is working right or whether it's not working appropriately, and then you can switch it. But you have to have a plan in place to tell yourself, look, at 3 months or at 6 months, I'm gonna analyze how well these are working. Next, the management plan. We've talked about this a little. Who's going to make up the team? What's their experience? You have to speak to each one of these things. What's their experience? Who is it? What kind of certifications do they have? What is their experience? Okay, they have 15 years in the industry. What's their education? They have a master's degree, whatever it is. What will their duties and responsibilities be? How are those different from some of the things that they've done in the past? Is it just building upon everything that they're good at, or is it taking the next step in the trajectory of what they could be? We feel that this is a growth strategy for them to move into this position. Are they retired? Now they're looking for something to do on the side. Are they part-time? Do you need them there all the time? And how will they be compensated? Early stages, at least, I see sometimes one of the things that people plan for is they say to themselves, when you approach things from looking at it, what it's going to look like in its most optimal stages, they might say, the business needs 4 employees and maybe 2 part-time in order for it to run smoothly as I want it to run. And I would say, okay, that's fine. But how many do you need to just start selling stuff? How many do you need to just start selling at the bare bones level? And usually the answer to that is I need myself and maybe 1 employee or just myself and maybe 1 part-timer. then you scale those other ones up. As you do that, you're able to see that your burn rate increases as you would hope. Your burn rate increases as your revenues increase. But if you're burn heavy on the front end and your revenues are coming up like this, they're not going to match. You're going to be spending too much early on in the process.
Is them being family a plus or a negative?
Well, that's a case-by-case basis, I would suppose. Some people would say, don't ever work with family. And, others would say it's a great way to leverage the resources that you have in order to save money at the early stages.
From the lender's view, I guess.
From a lender's view, they're going to look at the dynamics of that particular situation. I mean, if you have a plan to do that and you feel they're going to defer to you in a lot of ways and ask you those questions. How do you feel the family dynamics are with you working with your wife and your son every day? Do you think that's going to be functional? Are they going to be doing it full time? Have they been doing it? Did they come from an environment where they were always working in family businesses and it's not a transition? Or were they in college and now you're going to bring them in and are you forcing them to do it? I mean, it depends. The dynamics of those relationships are really case specific. So I couldn't answer that one. That goes back to what I was saying earlier. Those are questions only you can answer. I have no idea. This is financial planning information. What's the total project cost? The project cost is the initial investments plus 6 to 9 months of operating expenses. These things, the 6 to 9 months of operating expenses should include working capital, what you anticipate you're going to need in actual liquid cash to do things like pay for rent and pay employee salaries. Paying the employee salaries, that's a big one. If you can't pay employee salaries, month over month, you're in real bad shape. The employees, I've had a couple of clients and I've just known people in general that say, we're working for this company. They couldn't even pay us. Sometimes we just get our check 10 days late. I mean, you're really messing with people's lives when you put themselves in that position, and then you affect their ability to do good work for you. So if you don't have good systems in place, good HR and payroll systems, you're gonna fall into these kind of pitfalls. And me personally, I recognize, we talked about answering those questions for yourself. I recognize I hate HR functions. I just don't want to do them. I don't want to have to deal with it. So if it was me, I would say, well, I'm going to pay somebody from staff company to do these things. But if you don't mind doing those type of things, or if you're in a family situation like that where you have a wife that was in HR, or maybe you have a husband that served in HR for a long time and he did that, and he says, yeah, I know all the rules and regulations. I like following the trends. This is what I like to do. Well, then now it speaks to that other issue before. Who's going to do those roles? Who's going to do those things? Now, with regard to this total project cost, what we typically do is I send you a template for total project costs, and then you start estimating what all the expenses are going to be to get started. So you have to kind of approach this thing as two separate things in a way. A project has a start and an end. And for our purposes, the project is starting the business. It's just startup. But once you're started, that's it. That ended. And now you're in the longevity business of looking at what operational expenses and costs are going to be. And that is something separate. That's why they call a business a going concern, because it's expected to be a going concern. You're supposed to be able to start and then continue on indefinitely, ideally. So the project, though, what you want to consider in that, the reason it kind of includes parts of both is that it does include that 6 to 9 months of operational expenses and and that consists of working capital and a few other elements as well. So after you fill all that out, then we figure, okay, this is how much it costs to start. Sometimes, we have clients come in and they'll say, I've already done a little bit of this estimate of the total project costs. It's not fleshed out, completely yet, but I got a basic idea, and I'll say, well, how much is it going to cost? And they say, well, it's around maybe $250,000. All right, $250,000. I mean, we're going to get in more detail about that later on, because that's what everybody expects to see. You can't, inevitably, if you have expenses and it says staff and you put $40,000, that's just not good enough. You have to outline who is this staff and why does it cost $40,000, and what period of time does that cover, and does it include yourself? Because it shouldn't, mainly. I mean, if it does, it should be at a minimal level until your sales can support whatever function you're going to serve. But the thing to keep in mind with that as well, when you're looking at the total project cost, is you're going to be required to have 20 to 30%. So one of the things that sends people right back to the planning board is, how much does the project cost? $250,000. How much do you have? I have $5,000. Those two things do not, near the twain do they meet. And so you have to go back and say, look, if you have $5,000, then that means you can only multiply that by 5, and that might be what we can get for you to start out. If you do need $250,000, you're going to need to have $75,000 in pocket before you even start thinking about these type of things. Usually that involves retracing your steps and paring your plan back to kind of apply an approach of a hybrid bootstrapping / lending relationship approach, whereby you're going to say, this is what I thought it was going to be. So sometimes clients say, well, how do I get to that ideal, what we're going to need just to start up? And I always recommend, that approach that you had in your mind of telling me what it ideally would look like in year 3, you start right there. You start right there, and then we're going to, I hate to say it like this, but we're going to throw that plan away after we tear it up, because you never start at that optimal point. It's like, it's like thinking about running a marathon. You at the middle of, after you take off, right when you're at your good pace, you might be going 3-4 miles an hour, but you start at 0. You're standing still. So we need to look at what it's going to look like from standing still to ramping up and all that good stuff. But a good place to start is to look at what it's going to look like in its optimal stages, and then we'll par it back. So I mentioned I had a client doing landscaping recently, and he had a good equipment list, and that list ended up being, $400,000. And I say, well, how much do you have? And he had maybe about $30,000. I said, all right, well, do you anticipate getting the other 70 before you want to start? He said, no, I don't. I think we'd probably get about 35, 40, and then we're going to want to start, ordering some things. So then you got to get rid of some of that stuff. Then we get into like an in-depth analysis, and this is where, it's just good to bounce ideas off of another person. And I say, do you need this piece of equipment? This piece of equipment costs $60,000. Do you need that piece of equipment? Is it brand new? And he says, yeah, it's brand new. I said, you can't get it used or anything? And he said, well, no, that piece of equipment, you have to special order that piece of equipment. And once people have them, they don't sell them. You can't get it used. Okay, I said, well, let's move on. What about this thing right here? Do you need this? Is that brand new? He goes, yeah, that's brand new. I said, what is it? He goes, it's an F-250. It's a 2013. I said, you can get that thing used. I know you can get that thing used. I seen them. I see people driving them all the time. He said, all right, we can get that used. Well, what about the next thing? Some things you can't. There's just some things they're staying in that plan just the way they are. And if you still can't, reconcile that you don't have enough money after you've taken out all the want-to-haves and leave in just the need-to-haves, then you might need to do that whole plan over again. But sometimes you can reconcile it and say, well, after I took out all the nice-to-haves, what we really need is 120. I have to have 120. Well, now we got about 30. Let's see if we can bump it up, save about 10 more, and now we're talking about a functional plan. But if you can't reconcile that and par that back, then you have to just go back to the drawing board and start over again. In what form are you going to have cash, equipment, furniture? Are you going to buy anything that can be collateralized? Sometimes you get into a particular situation where the bank is maybe more willing to do a loan because they say, well, we can collateralize it. We could take a primary lien on this equipment, and this is the way they look at it. If you go out of business, then I get to sell your stuff, and then I get some of my money back, and that makes them feel warm and fuzzy about doing the business deal much more than a situation where maybe you're doing a service business and the majority of your requested capital is for working capital. Well, if you just blow through all that from a banker's perspective, well, then there's no way they're getting any of that back. That's just variable expense. You used it all. Your burn rate was too high, and now the only thing they have is your personal guarantee, and they're going to go get you. But that doesn't make them feel good about giving you the loan for that very reason. And then this is where you get into how much you need to borrow. It's usually 70-80% of the total project cost. But I've seen it a lot higher, in certain cases. I've seen it before where a guy wanted to open a restaurant, and it was going to cost him $150, and he had $90, and they still told him no. you never know what's going to happen. It's their case by case basis, and it also has a lot to do with the particular lender that you're talking to, what type of things they're trying to do with their portfolio, and what type of lender they are. I've had a client say, I tried to talk to a lender that was going to do factoring for me. I said, you can't do factoring because you're not even in business. They don't factor on receivables that you don't even have. So, sometimes a potential entrepreneur will look at a potential lending opportunity, but it's the wrong one. So, when you're talking to these banks, before you even approach the subject of, whether they want to do the loan with you, you might want to vet them a little bit. Hey, what kind of things are you trying to do? Are you looking to lend right now? Before you actually have to do the application, they'll tell you a lot of times. They'll tell you, well, we're looking to do these type of loans, but we're not doing any loans involving land at all because we're land heavy right now. We're just not doing them. We have too much land on our portfolio anyway, or we're looking to do franchises right now, or we're looking to do everything else but franchises. And if you want to do a franchise, you can say, well, that was a nice conversation. I'll see you when I see you. And then you go talk to the next guy that might actually, do a franchise loan. It doesn't mean that, they're a bad bank because they don't want to do a particular type of loan with you. It just means that they're not doing those type of things right now, and you just need to find the ones that are. And how will the funds be used? This is a function of, when you talk about your financial plan, they want to know exactly how you're going to use the funds. It's a lead into what I mentioned just a little while ago. Is it going to be for inventory purchase? Is it going to be for infrastructure, leasehold improvements? Are you going to put up a little restaurant, like a little which, and you need to buy all the equipment and the little bakery things that go in there and coolers to keep stuff cold? What is it going to be? And you actually have that all lined out, line item by line item. That's where sometimes we talk about, well, I need $100,000. Inevitably, that needs to be a actual whole number. I need $97,253, and that's why I can tell you exactly where every single dollar is going. It can't be rounded. By the time you get in there, it needs to be exact. Even if they're estimates, obviously, all of it's going to be an estimate on some level. When you get insurance quotes for, commercial insurance and stuff, those are just, they're estimates, but see, though you're going to use that number. You're going to get an estimate for what utility is going to be. You're going to use that number. But you're not going to, obviously you can't make that up. You're going to get it directly from utility companies. You're going to get it directly from insurance companies. This is an example of a financial plan. This guy's setting up a Quick Mart, like to borrow 35 on a 5-year note, 8.75. The following list documents the fixed assets and working capital requirements. So this is just a quick, just for an example, they want to buy a building. Like I said, that never really happens. Shelves, cooler, 15, cash register, and they need 15 worth of working capital. They need 45,000. He wants to put in 10, leaving 35, and those kind of fall into those ratios that we talked about. And this is a case where we could say, well, let's start working on developing this plan and figuring out which one of the lenders would probably be best for you. Except for in this case, I like this example actually. I would tell them, why are you buying a building for $25,000? That's not functional. And then you could move on there. And this is what it looks like for your actual sales strategy. As you can see, this is a lead into what I had mentioned before. Look at the top line of sales. It is kind of high for what I think it should be, but this is just, it serves an example. As you can see, it increases month over month. It doesn't just, it's not straight line all the way across. Whereas the advertising expense, the car expenses and stuff like that, those do increase a little bit, but normally you're not going to see much fluctuation in insurance. See that right there? Some of these things you're not going to see very much fluctuation in. Payroll stays the same. At an inflection point right here, maybe month 7, you might have in your staffing strategy that you're going to hire like another part-timer, in which case that would go up to $37.50 or something like that. Advertising, the one thing I don't like about this example, but I like to leave it like that anyway, is because it's a good way to show how people build these inappropriately. Your advertising expense should be opposite. What do you call that thing? Inflection or inverse. Your advertising expense should be inverse. It should be real high at the beginning and taper off. It shouldn't be low at the beginning and taper up. because it's what I mentioned earlier. Nobody knows who you are. They don't know Jose Pina. They have no idea. Pina Construction, never heard of them before. You need to spend a lot at the beginning, and then you can taper that off at the end. Then it evens out maybe the second and third year. And you can, what the mix of those things are, that's going to be something you're going to address in the market mix, but that's an important thing to keep in mind. This is another example of the operating income. See, this is what we talked about before as the pre-tax. If you just looked at this, then you would be thinking to yourself, oh, we're doing pretty good. It looks pretty good. Operating income, month 6, 10,000. Well, at the end of the year, you're going to get taxed on that. You know, you got to take that into consideration. So this is a recap. These are the sections of the business plan. We went over those, and we're going to get a lot more detail on each one of these. That's what the next sessions are going to be. We're going to talk about each one of them, probably an hour or two, and get into them in some more detail. Pitfalls of poor business plans, high focus on the product or service. The reason that's there is because it's important to keep in mind that the infrastructure and the support structures and the elements supplemental to what you're actually doing are sometimes more important than the actual product that you have. You know, I mentioned, differentiation based on customer service. If you don't have a CRM system, a customer relation management system, then it's just hot air. You have to have plans in place to do all of the things that you want to do, and all of those support elements need to be spoken to in the business plan, and you really want to consider them because they have an impact on your operational success. Little familiarity with target market, financial projections beyond industry norms. If anything, this is one of the things we can help you with. Just, it's an assessment of what those financial projections look like in relation to what is going on in the industry, just to kind of give you some bearings about, well, is this feasible based on what's going on out there right now in the market or not? Unrealistic growth projections, some of the things that if you think it's going to be a hockey stick, I don't have a blackboard, but there's an approach that a lot of people like to use when they build financial projections. That is, we've all seen those graphs where you have the little L right there, and then you have like a little bell chart or something in there. Well, a lot of times people are overly optimistic, and their revenue looks like this. Starts out low and just goes straight up. Does that really happen in most cases? Well, no, not really. It looks like one of those squiggly lines from one of those cardiogram machines, and maybe there's a whole lot more lows than there are highs, and you need to keep that in mind. High reliance on specialty engineering or one client or one supplier. So this goes back to what I said, do you require too much technical expertise to get done what you need to get done that you don't currently have, that you within your own self or within your own management team, and leaning on one large client, one supplier too much. I think we're almost done here. We've got about 5 minutes. Give me a second. Yeah, we're almost done. 2 more. And these are the main reasons for loan denial: poor cash flow or working capital. If that speaks to what amount of money you have right now. Poor market for product or service. If the lender does not believe you've appropriately reconciled what's going on in the market with your strategy to execute your plan, then they're not gonna go for it. If I often used to use that example when I give trainings in Fort Hood, I would say, what would you think if you were a lender and somebody said, hey, here we are in Fort Hood, Killeen, Texas. I want to open a pawn shop. I don't know how many of y'all have been to Killeen, Texas, but there's nothing but pawn shops in Killeen. You could hit one every block and probably hit 20 in a 20-block radius. And obviously everybody there says, well, obviously I'm not going to invest in that. Well, that's what we're talking about here. Poor credit rating. Sometimes as veterans, I get the question, is there any special program that allows for me to get lending even though I have bad credit? I heard something about there being a veteran program for that. The answer is no. Within lending relationships, the lending institution is always the entity that decides whether to extend credit or not extend credit, and they always base their credit decision on the 5 C's of credit, character, collateral, capacity, and things like that. And credit is just something you can't get around. You have to have good credit. They're going to base their decisions on that. What there are opportunities to do is improve that credit score, get some credit counseling, resources for pulling your credit score for free and working on improving it. But that's just one of the things that you have to work on. Low owner's equity, that's poor collateral, lack of competence. This has to do with the management team. You know, it seems weird to tell a guy that's a pilot, you don't have the appropriate, you're not competent to open this coffee shop, but that's exactly what they'll do because you've never done coffee shop before. Even though you've done all these great other things, you have to be able to explain how you have experience doing what you want to do. And less than 2 years in business. This speaks to the fact that it's really hard for startups to get funding. And it's one of the reasons and the impetus for the growth in the micro lending industry. Now I think the issue is being addressed a lot better, and businesses or startup businesses with, you know, just the idea and getting a startup are much more able to get lending as they require. But the hard thing I should clarify with that is that if you have a requirement for high initial capital, it's a little bit harder. You know, these companies, these non-bank lenders, they do, you know, between 5 and maybe on the high end, 250 most of the time. Some of them do, you know, higher than that on occasion. You know, even with Acción and stuff like that, they might do a couple of deals that are millions, but the majority of them are in that low range. I like to tell people between the $50,000 and $250,000 range. So, but I'm pretty sure the majority of us would fall into those categories. Summary here: business plans crucial for long-term success. Plan all aspects of your business and get help when needed. That is all for today. I want to thank you guys for not falling asleep on me. That's awesome. I can't say the same about everybody in the webinar world there, but the next class is going to be next Thursday. Between now and then, Victoria will send you all out this presentation, and then after every session, y'all will get this PowerPoint presentation. If there's anything y'all have questions about in the meantime, y'all have my card, and if y'all would like to, over the next few days, today, even later, send me an email, and we'll set up our first appointment with you guys. You'll either be talking to myself or talking to Bill.